Welcome to the 25th meeting in 2012 of the Health and Sport Committee. And as usual at this point, can I remind those present with mobile phones or Blackberries to switch them off at this point, because they can often interfere with the sound system. May I first of all welcome three new members today to the committee: Mark MacDonald, Aileen MacLeod and David Torrance. And the first item on our agenda today is to allow these new members to make any declaration of interest related to the committee's remits. And can I invite the new members in turn, Mark MacDonald, Aileen MacLeod and David Torrance, to make any necessary declarations. Mark.
Thank you, Convener. I would direct members to my register of interests. I believe the only item there which may fall in the remit of the committee is that I'm a patron of Gordon Dementia Services, which is a charity in Aberdeenshire.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Convener. Can I also just say that I am delighted to be joining the Health and Sport Committee, having come from the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee and the European and External Relations Committee also. I have no registrable interests to declare that are relevant to this committee's remit.
Thank you. David.
Good morning, Convener. Could I refer members to my register of interests? I'm a member of the Scout Association.
Thank you all for that. We now move to agenda item number 2. This item on our agenda today is another roundtable, part of the committee inquiry into supporting community sport. Today's first roundtable is focusing on coaching, and I at this point thank the witnesses for the attendance this morning, and I'm going to ask everyone to just introduce themselves as we're round, beginning with Mark.
As previously introduced, Mark MacDonald, MSP for North East Scotland.
Richard Simpson, MSP for Mid Scotland and Fife. John Lee from Volunteer Development Scotland.
Aileen MacLeod, MSP for South Scotland.
Gavin MacLeod, CEO with Scottish Disability Sport.
David Torrance, MSP, Kirkcaldy constituency.
Gil Patterson, MSP for Clydebank Mulgai.
Alistair Gray, Chairman of the Winning Scotland Foundation.
Nanette Milne, MSP for North East Scotland.
Drew Smith, Member for Glasgow.
Bob Doris, MSP for Glasgow.
Judy Murray, Tennis Coach.
Thank you. I should mention at this point that Liz McColgan is sprinting her way from Dundee, caught up in the traffic, and Alec Richardson, Chief Executive Gladiators Programme. And I think there's been some disruption on roads and travel this morning, so we await their attendance. Bob Doris is going to kick off the session, and hopefully with a round table, it can be a bit more relaxed than it has been up to now, and that we can get a discussion and share the experience here, and hopefully your knowledge that will influence our eventual report on these matters. Bob, can you kick off for us, please?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Good morning, everyone. Could I perhaps give a context to the sport inquiry that the committee is doing? Yesterday, I was with Nanette Milne at Aberdeen Sports Village, where we saw a wonderful facility, including the 50-metre pool that's under construction there. Recently, the committee had a tour of the Sir Chris Hoy velodrome. If we look at the investment in quality sports facilities in the last 5 years, there's been £73 million invested. If we place that beside hundreds of millions of pounds invested in the Commonwealth Games and I believe £25 million for a national performance centre for sport in the pipeline, what I would like to ask the witnesses is two things. Firstly, whilst we always need to do more to develop quality facilities, what difference do you think facilities like this will make in terms of developing elite athletes for the future? But just as importantly to this committee, what you think the relationship is between these quality facilities, developing elite athletes, but greater participation in sport and physical activity in our communities more generally. So what is that relationship as we invest in top quality infrastructure for sport? How do we ensure we get that general participation on the ground? Because both things are desirable, and those are the things we want to achieve as part of the sport inquiry.
Who would like to respond? Mr. Gray.
Good morning, Convener. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity to join the informal discussion this morning. There's been huge investment gone into facilities in sport, but I think the bigger issue is affordable access. And that is if you speak to any people in sport, that is the key thing. And too often we find that access is not affordable, and also that the focus, indeed on many of the owners of those facilities, is on having to reduce costs as a result of reducing budgets. But in fact, they miss the point. They actually don't look at increasing demand. Because in any facility, you can, of course, reduce costs, you can reduce service, you can reduce opening hours, but the key thing is to increase demand. I was recently involved with one of Scotland's major cities who said we need to reduce our budget by 3 million. And the issue was turned round by saying, well, how could we increase revenue by 3 million? By getting more people through, by encouraging programmes that brought people in that made them spend more when they were actually in those facilities. And I think too often we get focused onto budgets and costs and grants and investment, but without affordable access, these wonderful facilities, and like you have been round the Chris Hoy Velodrome and indeed Aberdeen centre there, Aberdeen Village, Sports Village, they're fantastic facilities, but they won't be fantastic in terms of developing elite athletes unless we can get numbers of athletes through the doors and enable proper coaching to actually take place to create the pathways and take these athletes along the pathway.
Mr. Lee.
Yes. Thanks, Convener. If I could just say something briefly, I could speak more about grassroots sport, perhaps. In composing our submission, we took some soundings from some of our stakeholders, and some feedback we got said that for grassroots community organisations, it was more about getting access to quite fairly basic facilities, town halls, church halls, schools, and so on. They weren't really looking for high-tech, state-of-the-art, big ticket facilities. It was more about getting access to those very kind of close at hand facilities that should be much more accessible to those grassroots organisations. So I think the two have to be seen very much hand in hand. Yes, if we want to encourage elite athletes, then yes, we might need the big ticket state-of-the-art facilities. But if we're looking more at the grassroots community level, we have to pursue a very kind of open and easy access policy at those more kind of grassroots community facilities.
Mr. McLeod.
For me, I think the two are very closely linked, certainly from a disability sport point of view. I think the new facilities that are going up will be a huge bonus for sport in Scotland. From our perspective, the Aberdeen Sports Village that you mentioned is a fantastic example of good practice. First-rate facilities, but they're taking an inclusive approach to the clubs that are using the facilities there as well. So, from our point of view, that's a model that we would like to see replicated across the country. I think the facilities such as the Chris Hoy Velodrome, we've not been able to pursue a cycling programme in Scotland because we've just not had a facility. Our top performance disabled cyclists are having to go down to Manchester or Swansea to train. Will now be able to train in Scotland. I think that will undoubtedly be a huge benefit. But for me, the real key, and a lot of the research points back to attitudinal barriers as being the biggest barriers to people with disabilities in terms of using facilities. Costs, yes. Physical access, yes. But it's the attitudes. Probably the most successfully integrated sports facility in Scotland is the Fife Institute in Glenrothes. It's not the best building in the world, it's a 70s build, but because of the ethos of the building, the staff training, the way that it's marketed, the culture of the programming, it's a fully included environment. So for me, it's really about ensuring that the facilities are good and they're good quality, and I think that's going to happen, but also the coaches that are going to be delivering the sessions have the sufficient training to be able to include and to be able to include appropriately, and that there's a culture of inclusiveness about the facility as well, so it's marketed properly and programmed properly too.
Anyone else? No? It leads on quite neatly to the coaching side, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what Alistair's saying about we need facilities to be accessible, and they need to be affordable, because we have an enormous opportunity right now on the back of the Olympics and with the Commonwealth Games coming up to really capture the imagination of the Scottish public. And I don't mean children, I mean adults as well, because it is the adults, the parents in particular, who will enrol the children into sports classes. So if we can enthuse the adults, then we have more chance of getting more children playing. But there have to be places that are localised and easy to access, and they have to be affordable. But facilities on their own will not get the job done. It has to be about people, and we have to look at creating a workforce that can enthuse and inspire to get kids into sport and adults into sport, but it has to be able to retain them, because it's one thing getting them excited about it now on the back of the Olympics and with the Commonwealth Games coming, but in order to retain them in the sport, that really comes down to the people. It comes down to the Pied Pipers who get them into the clubs or the schools or the parks and enjoy what they're doing, but that there is a plan to keep them in the game. So whether that is through competition, whether it's through coaching, whether it's just through being part of a social group, because sport can give so much to, I talk about kids in particular because when I was young, I played every sport under the sun, but I played it all at local level and at school level. And there's nothing better than representing your club or representing your school. But it was my parents who got me into sport. And so for me, it was second nature to get my kids into sport. And I started off coaching at our local club as an ex-player who wasn't a coach. I was just a parent who actually I was looking for something to get out of the house and get away from my kids when they were very small for a few hours. And so I started running some classes and things at our club. And I ran some teams at the primary school and at the high school, and I did it all on a voluntary basis, and I kind of evolved into becoming a tennis coach. But my driver was my passion for the sport and my experience of what being part of community clubs, tennis, badminton, whatever else I could be part of, brought to me as a person. And so I very much believe in that whole localised thing. And if I could tell you just one little story about when I ran the primary team at Dunblane High School. We had 4 little boys in the team. Of course, 2 of them were my kids, but there was 2 other parents of the other 2 boys that were in the team, and I did the coaching, but to involve everybody in that process, the school obviously organised the kind of fixtures, but one of the parents did all the booking of the transport and the venues and so forth, and the other parent, who was completely non-sporty and felt quite threatened by the whole thing and got very, very nervous before the matches and used to go home and lie down and have a G&T. Her job was to come down and set the table for the tea and then come down and kind of wash it up and all the rest of it. So we all felt like that we had a part. And I think that for me, the school thing is huge. Schools have great facilities these days, and we should look to be opening them up to the wider community and for more things to be happening after school time and at weekends, not just for kids but for adults, and to bring back more of that competitive sport thing. But use the parents, encourage the parents, educate the parents to help out with all of this, because it's not necessary to always have to pay people to do things. We do get caught up in budgeting and worrying about how much things are going to cost, but parents want things to happen for their kids. They want them to have active lives. They want them to be enjoying themselves. And I think if you can do a good job educating the parents, then you're halfway there. And again, to go back to another experience of when I was the national coach in Scotland, we had a tiny little budget and I was working on my own. And it was a real challenge, but I had a real belief, and I realised that for us to have any chance to bring through a number of kids and give them the opportunity to play well, we needed big numbers. So we started with about 20 kids aged between 8 and 11. And because we had no budget, I had to get the parents involved in lift sharing and supervising tournaments and little mini match plays and all the rest of it. And out of those 20 kids, we had four of those kids played in the Olympics this year. And that was from what you might say was quite an amateur setup with very little money, but a lot of desire and passion to make something happen.
We picked up, Drew and I were at St Maurice's yesterday in the Cumbernauld area, and we picked up some of the role of the school itself. The young sporting ambassadors who join teams and are now coaching teams in basketball and very successfully. And this, as you mentioned, Judy, the local access the big message yesterday was about local access and availability. You know, so it was on people's doorsteps, and they could do that. Alistair, you wanted back in?
Just a supplementary, convener.
Yes, sure.
You know, I was just thinking about this in the time that it took to drive through this morning from Glasgow, which is very good actually in terms of reflecting on this session this morning. You know, I'm 3 weeks into my 65th year. 1948 was the last time I was born, but also the last time that London hosted the Olympic Games. And I've lived through 2 Commonwealth Games and other activities. And, you know, I think the thing we've got to get across is exactly this point about it's down to the behaviour and culture of our people. It's not to do with this hardware. This is much more about software. And this is the time of our lives. We're never again, in the next 5 to 6 years, going to have a potential legacy from the Olympic Games, from the Paralympic Games, from the Commonwealth Games, from the Ryder Cup, from the World Gymnastics, from the European Swimming, from the Paralympic competitions that are going to be going on, and hopefully from our Youth Olympic Games in 2018 in Glasgow. Can you just imagine any nation that could have that opportunity? And we really do throw it away at our peril. But I'm suggesting to you this morning that I'm excited, actually, convener, by the potential for the community hubs. We're in danger of joining things up. We mustn't throw that away. But we do need a new model for a new era. It's like using my first Walkman in the era of iPhone 5. So I really challenge some of the things which we're doing. And already there are signs of danger that we should be aware of. You know, 100 children turned up in Motherwell to an athletics session to be faced with 2 coaches after the Olympics. Cycling has now got waiting lists at a large number of clubs within Scotland. Cycling in Britain added 10%, 4,500 new members within a month of the Olympic Games. But yet we still have clubs, cycling clubs, that have got a come and try session within the club itself for the early entrance into cycling. The first come and try race is 40k. We also have a story within the foundation of a 5-year-old who went with his mum along to a football club for his mother 2 weeks later to receive a text saying your son is not good enough. We really have to start to address the behaviours, I think, as Judy was suggesting. And I'm very fortunate in the foundation that in Positive Coaching Scotland we have a tremendous product, if you like, which is being embraced by Scottish football and Scottish rugby to help youngsters come in and enjoy sport, and to try and keep them in it for life, to give them skills to improve their health, to change the behaviour, not just of the youngster, but of their parents, their teachers and their coaches, so that through it we can keep youngsters within sport. And through Workout for Sport, a programme where volunteers from business can be brought together into clubs and national governing bodies to do particular jobs. But, you know, the challenge is that the sports and the clubs, in some ways, they don't know how to use the volunteers unless they've actually got the sort of thing, Judy, you were describing within the club itself. So volunteers want to volunteer, but they need to have the right opportunities. So I think there is a need, just in summarising, for a new model with vibrant community hubs where the big banner is about fun. It's not about elite. And we certainly don't want concrete hubs and we pride ourselves in multi-million pounds worth of investment. We want vibrant community hubs where there's less activity and more good practice. We want to focus on demand, improving the quality of demand rather than just worrying about supply all the time. We've got to focus much less on individual initiatives and much more on partnership and collaboration. And in particular, and finally, we've got to focus on building a new generation of leaders rather than worrying about governance and rules and health and safety. Because the change will come, I think, from that.
Some of the evidence, Drew's wanting in, I think Gil might be wanting in. Some of the evidence, though, that through all of that history in Olympics and legacy and enthusiasm and the demand that's built up now, I mean, I'm sure I saw in the evidence that the amount of volunteers, basically, that have been prepared to volunteer hasn't risen at all. It's basically pretty flat. 14% of the population and 18% of the population has been the high and low. John Lee, you like to comment on that?
Yes, convener. It's actually, at the moment, about 30% of the population of Scotland are involved in regular formal volunteering. The main source that we have is something called the Scottish Household Survey, which is published annually by the Scottish Government and the Office of National Statistics. So that equates to about 1.2 million people, which is significant numbers of people, really. But you're right to say that it has essentially flatlined for the past decade, and it shows a quite uncanny similarity. Every time we look at the Scottish Household Survey, we're seeing it fluctuating around about the 30% level. So what seems to be happening is we have a kind of slow trickle in and a slow trickle out. So we have this kind of very kind of static picture of it. Sport is generally one of the higher activity categories. We have about 15–16% of people involved in that out of the total 30%. But we notice from the Scottish Household Survey that volunteering in sport is always quite popular with young people. We have about 20–22% of young people involved in sport, but that tends to decline a bit with age, and overall about 15% of the population involved in volunteering in sport. So you're right to say that we do have a static picture within that 30%. It really tends not to shift, but there's some evidence from a longitudinal study called the British Household Panel Survey, which suggests that actually more people in the population have experience of volunteering. The household survey just gives us a snapshot at any one time. But it's still fairly considerable numbers of people, 1.2 million people.
Yeah, I don't want to downplay it at all. I mean, you know, as politicians, we know how difficult it is to get volunteers at any level, and we know that you've got to replace the people who drop out. So you know, I accept that, but also I read in the evidence that there's 55,000 registered youth football players. And it's amazing we can't get 11 of them that can play for Scotland in a winning style, but 55,000. I mean, so it does meet that demand. So there is a wide variance here. Yes.
Absolutely. But just to say that I think what we're seeing is volunteering is absolutely crucial to sport in Scotland. I think the Olympics is helping to show that. Glasgow 2014 will definitely show it. Volunteering is absolutely crucial to our endeavours to energise community sport in Scotland. And I think Alistair's absolutely right. We have to look at kind of new models of involving volunteers and making the best use of people's talents. We think that about of the 90,000 sports coaches and volunteers in Scotland, 84,000 of them are volunteers. So volunteering is absolutely crucial to this whole debate, and the committee's investigation into it is to be welcomed.
Maybe get back to what could encourage them and what would sustain their activity, you know, when it might be just the sport that comes in. They don't want to be the treasurer or the, you know, these some of us. Drew Smith wanted in for a quick in the next.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to go back to what Alistair was saying around community sport hubs, and that is something that we've already heard a lot of evidence about. And Convener, you mentioned that well, a number of members of the committee have visited different kinds of sports hubs. And I suppose one of the things that's coming over is that we do need that wholesale change away from perhaps how we imagine sports clubs in the past, of clubhouses and blazers and people being fairly precious about their own, or not precious, but most interested in their own particular discipline, and trying to create a new culture of, people have talked about the European example of large multi-sports clubs that keep people involved in a range of different things for longer. And I just wanted some more reflections from the panel about whether that is a realistic vision for how community sport could look in Scotland. But also, I suppose, from the coach's perspective of, does that change then the link towards those who are training more and moving towards the elite level, if all of our emphasis is on these large community sports where perhaps there isn't the same focus on bringing through the very best at a particular discipline?
Anyone want to take that one? Alistair?
Contribute to it. You know, I don't get a notion there are loads of blazers out there. There are more likely to be almost lifelong volunteers running sports clubs or very low resources. Our clubs are many clubs are very fragile. And we're not just talking about the SPL. You know, there are a lot of volunteer-driven clubs are getting by on budgets. They're being very entrepreneurial in terms of what they do within their community. And I think the excitement about community sports hubs is that you can actually get synergy. You can actually, you know, by the local authority, local businesses, local clubs, local schools coming together and focusing on fun and keeping people in sport, we can actually start to create, more young people playing sport. And that's the start of any pathway to the top. You've got to have, obviously, numbers at the bottom, and then you have to have, modern, supportive clubs with very positive coaching who are taking these youngsters and dealing with them in the right way. Sport is too often world-class at throwing people out, having recruited them. If you look at, particularly within women, if you like, the wastage rate between 12 and 16 is huge. And things like Positive Coaching Scotland initiatives are actually keeping youngsters in sport longer, because the coaches are developing positive attitudes towards youngsters and coaching them as to how to be the best they can be within teams, and to honour their game. And it's just so important. The Scottish FA have really embraced, despite your comments, convener, they've embraced Positive Coaching Scotland. Hundreds of clubs, ranging from Celtic at the top right the way down to junior and amateur clubs, are embracing the philosophy behind double goal coaching, of coaching youngsters in sport and coaching them in life, giving youngsters sport as a tool for life that enables them to acquire skills and to develop their ambition and to develop the right sort of attitudes that we want. The SFA are investing a large amount of resource and people into that, and they have to be supported and applauded for that. Also, Scottish Rugby. Hillfoot's Rugby Club is the fastest growing rugby club in Scotland. That's not because it started at 5 people and is growing. They're a vibrant club who, again, are embracing the ideals. And both the Scottish FA and the Scottish Rugby Union are applying a quality mark to those clubs, of which positive coaching is an integral part. So I am excited about community hubs, but again, let's maybe not invent them on the back of what sports development professionals should be saying that we do, but more about actually creating a community, because that's what they have in Holland. Very much the best example I've come across in all my years of tramping the world of sport. The Dutch community model is by far one of the best. It's multi-sport, it's run by families, and it keeps people in sport.
Anyone else? Not to that one. Nanette, do you want to?
Yes, I mean, we've heard, and I agree, that we should be talking about fun. If we're going to get people interested in sport, young people, it should be fun. And you've heard from you're taking evidence from the Scottish Sports Association about the importance of young kids becoming physically literate. You'll be able to run, catch, throw, swim, and do that further in primary school. And we know that there's a lack. I mean, things are improving slightly, but there is a lack of, for want of a better word, qualified PE teachers training young kids at primary school level. I just wonder what the panel's views are on the need, given that kids do become physically literate at an early age, they develop self-confidence, and I think that would maybe come first, and then if they can then try a few different sports, they find something that they like, but they're sort of anticipate that they'll enjoy it, it's going to be fun, and that they might even become good at it. I just wonder what your reactions are to that.
See you nodding there.
Yeah, I think it's very important for kids to learn the coordination skills, the physical skills at a young age, and obviously the best place for them to learn those is a mixture of doing it at home with their parents. So showing the parents things that they could do with their kids, and also doing it in the early years of primary school. But we have to recognise that primary schools classes are often 30 plus pupils, and one teacher, many teachers don't feel physically competent themselves to do these kind of things with kids. So we have to find a way to support the teachers. So whether that's by putting in an additional workforce, or your PE students or your teacher trainers, and training them up to help out, because I know that when I go into schools to introduce tennis to kids, and most of the time when I'm doing it nowadays is a one-off, and often I can be going into a badminton court size gym hall, and there's 30 kids and a teacher, and I always take 4 other coaches with me, and we split the kids into small groups, and we make 6 different activities around the thing, and we end up with a little game of tennis at the end so they can keep the score and so forth. But I couldn't dream of trying to occupy 30 children in a difficult sport like tennis, where you're coordinating 2 pieces of equipment, a racket and a ball, within a small space. in a badminton-sized court, absolutely no chance. So you do need to support the teachers, because there are some teachers who are incredibly good at doing that because they are that way inclined, but there are many who it's just not for them. So I think a support of the teachers in primaries 1, 2 and 3 to really help with those coordination skills, but then to link that to more opportunity to go into a particular sport. So we need the schools to be having little school teams, and it doesn't have to be any great standard. It's the whole thing of the sense of belonging and doing your best and representing your school or your club, because I agree with what you said, that I think that beyond the age of 8, if kids have developed those kind of good coordination skills, they can become reasonably competent at whatever sport they might like to take up. If they don't, then it's much harder when you're later in life. You think, oh, I'd like to try such and such, and you're not coordinated. That's a killer self-confidence wise. So I think we should invest as much in making our kids physically literate as we do making them literate.
Early years? No one else? I've got a couple. I'll put you down, Richard, but I've got Mark, followed by Gil.
Thanks, Convener. Just listening to the discussion that's been going on. First of all, I wasn't able to go to the Aberdeen Sports Village yesterday, although I regularly go there and play seven-a-side football, so I know how good a facility is. And I remember when I was younger, involved in the athletics club, training there when it was the Chris Anderson Stadium, and it's just chalk and cheese now compared to what was there previously. But what I was interested by was the discussion around volunteer involvement, and we're focusing quite a lot on the coaching side, obviously. But there's another element to the volunteering that I think we need to bear in mind, and that's the people who turn up to be match officials or umpires, etc. And there is a problem in some places of attracting people to take on these roles. And if your youth football teams turn up for their game, but there's nobody available to referee it, they don't get a game very often. So we need to work out how do we encourage people to volunteer. You know, it's the less attractive side, if you will, to the sport in many ways, because it's often the person who gets it in the neck for the decisions they're making and things like that. But we also need, as well as people volunteering to coach our youngsters, we also need these people in order to facilitate the activity itself, so that they can actually, so that, you know, they're not just being coached at football or tennis or things like that. They can actually then go and put that into practice in a match setting. The other thing that I wondered as well is whether whether we're being flexible enough sometimes in terms of the bureaucracy that sometimes surrounds volunteer sport. One example that I would give is an amateur football club in my area, Newmarket United, who were 8 hours late in submitting their paperwork to compete in the league for the following season, and were expelled from the league, have lost all their players, and may now have to fold as a club as a result of that. So, you know, the question I would have is, are we sometimes a little bit inflexible with clubs that are essentially volunteer enterprises from the association's point of view? That's maybe something that folk around the table might have a view on. And the other one is around the notion of sort of unstructured play and how that helps get young people interested in sport as well. I've come here from the Petitions Committee, and at the Petitions Committee last week we had a petition from Play Scotland, which was all about developing opportunities for children to play. And I guess the question I would ask is, you know, how do we encourage unstructured play, as it were, for children? I mean, obviously, as a parent myself, I'm very keen to get my kids out playing in the park, and just running around and having fun. But, you know, do we have enough spaces available for children to play, and what can we do to try and improve that? I know the government are looking to put funding into improving playground spaces, but is there more that could be done in that respect?
Thanks, Mark. Lots in there. That's fine. I don't want you had the walk of shame there, I'm afraid. But, yes, I've trod that path too many times myself, but that's fine. You know, I was just trying to lighten it, but it just added to your embarrassment probably. We've got two or three issues there about this. You know, I thought that was particularly interesting. One, the workforce planning of volunteers, which is a challenge in itself within a club and across the board officials and match officials to allow all of that to take place would be, you know, it's John Lee, and then Alistair Gray, did you want in? And
yes,
Gavin as well? Yes.
Some very good points there, Mark. If I could just mention something, Convener, there is now a national framework for the development of volunteering in sport that was developed jointly by Volunteer Development Scotland and Sport Scotland. It's the first time that we've had such a document, such a framework in Scotland. And some of the things that it tries to do is help clubs plan more effectively for volunteers, just put a bit more thought about how they seek to engage volunteers. We don't want to over-formalise it, we don't want to over-bureaucratise it, but we think we just want to encourage people to do a bit more planning, a bit more thought about how they might engage volunteers, to make it easy to access, to make it fun, to make it enjoyable, to build on the passion that we've already spoken about. So this framework is really trying to encourage these things, a bit more thought given to how volunteers might be engaged and how we can ensure that they have a good experience. I could just mention briefly the bureaucracy point you mentioned, Mark, although it's a different thing. I think there's an ongoing myth, an ongoing perception that things like disclosure checks, criminal records check puts people off volunteering. Sport Scotland have done some research into this, Volunteer Development Scotland have done some research into this, and I think the Children's Commissioner have too. And it shows quite clearly that people are not put off by the need to have disclosure checks. If it's explained to them in the right way, if they realise that they are playing a part in protecting children in vulnerable groups, rather than just seeing it as a bureaucratic exercise, then they actually are fully supportive of that, and it doesn't put people off at all. So we're kind of trying to dispel that persistent myth. It doesn't put people off, but you're absolutely right. The need is there, and hopefully this framework will go towards addressing the need to plan more effectively for volunteers and to manage volunteers more effectively.
You're going to get a response from the witnesses, and then I think Gavin.
Yes, certainly from our point of view, volunteers are fundamental to everything that we do. We're a multi-sport organisation, so our key partners are local authorities and governing bodies of sport in the mainstream. So our real remit is to provide the volunteers, the relevant volunteers, with the education and training and the skills and the knowledge to overcome the fear factor of working with disabled groups from our point of view. And I think that's a fundamental one here, the education and training. Whether it be officials, we had our five-a-side football championships last couple of weeks ago, and we had SFA referees there. Now they were working with deaf, learning disability, physical disability. So a little bit of training just in terms of what to expect. A referee is a referee, a good coach is a good coach. But a little bit of education and training to try and overcome that is absolutely key from our point of view. So we're delivering that. We're working with mainstream governing bodies of sport to try and make sure their technical officials and their coaches are suitably trained. And we're doing that at UK level through UKCC and trying to make sure that UK coaching structures are inclusive. And we're doing it at a Scottish level as well through governing bodies of sport as well. We're also taking that ethos into schools at the moment, back to the point about early years. One of our big issues at the moment is still anecdotally out there that a lot of disabled pupils aren't getting physical education or aren't getting a quality physical education. And a lot of that comes down, great sympathy for the education sector, because they're not being given the skills and the knowledge and the resources to be inclusive in a PE setting. So we're doing a lot of work just now through Education Scotland and Sport Scotland to deliver education, disability inclusion training to the education sector out there, both in tertiary education and both through in service, so that we're again upskilling the workforce to be able to deliver. And then probably just to expand, the one element that we have within our sector that probably mainstream doesn't is the care element. In terms of a volunteer workforce, we actually require greater numbers because many of the athletes that we work with have a care element as well as the coaching element as well. So again, just in terms of the work that we are doing, we're working with physiotherapists and with the NHS and with universities to try and identify the key personnel to be able to come in and to support individuals and to be able to give the lifelong sporting experience for the disabled athletes that we work with.
Yes, Convener. Just building on the point regarding volunteer officials and coaches and others who get involved. Interestingly, the positive coaching work that the much maligned Scottish Football Association are actually carrying out is having a significant impact in terms of the attitudes of coaches, parents, teachers, as well as players. Particularly in the whole area of respect for each other, but also for the officials and indeed for the game itself. And they've embraced it to the extent that, I'm sure you will not believe this, but in Glasgow there was a tournament recently of under 9-year-olds where there was no referee. The youngsters actually controlled the games themselves. They realised when they had committed a foul. They realised when they had put the ball out or whatever, and they controlled the game themselves. And my colleague from Dublin, who'd come across to the festival with his youngster and his team, couldn't believe this and how well it actually worked. So by instilling the right values and instilling the right behaviours at an early age, particularly I have to say in parents, that you get this opportunity to really change the culture of the sport. And there needs to be more recruitment of leader coaches and level 1 coaches. The UKCC, as you're saying, Gavin, it's pretty exhaustive above level 2. It's expensive, it takes time. But if we can get lots of coaches who at least know the basics of how to deal with youngsters and keep them in sport, that can actually sustain a lot of clubs going forward. And your point about officials, I don't know if you know that one of the umpires for the Olympic hockey final was a Scot, Jed Curran, from Dundee, who has refereed now, or umpired, something like 150 internationals. Scotland have had 4 Olympic final umpires in hockey in the last 20 years, which is pretty outstanding. Many of the officials in London would be Scots who will have come through, but they are the forgotten party in many ways. They're not blazers, although they get a blazer, and they get their uniform, but they are people who are proud and they are given the opportunity to move through. And I think sports need to make more of that. And Jed, I hope, will stay in hockey as a role model for some time, as Craig Madden did before him. That it's very important to inspire those technical officials, as well as the others, and for sports to have proper workforce plans that include officials and coaches, as well as the administrators, so that there is genuine succession planning going on. And Sports Scotland, through their club development model and also through the volunteer framework, there's the basis of that there, if again we can just collaborate and work more effectively together. But let's stop calling them volunteers. What did London tell us to call them? Games makers. That's cool.
Okay. Well, we've got some radical. Okay. We had the concept introduced in written evidence about walking football. Now football without referees. This could be a first for the Scottish Parliament. This could be a radical report eventually, but well, the Scottish Parliament, maybe some referees in here is required. Judy Murray, you want to comment on?
I really just wanted to reinforce what's been said there, that the key to it, of moving everything forward, is really in the education of people, whether that's volunteers, officials, coaches, whatever it is, because just when I'm listening to you talking about the number of volunteers that we have in Scottish sport, these will range from the lady who makes the tea at the cricket club to somebody who sits on the board of a governing body. It's a huge different range of skills, but everybody is valuable, and it's just making sure that all the volunteers who want to be involved with a sport for whatever reason are educated and supported to do whatever that job is to the best of their ability, just in the same way that we encourage the people who take up sport as coaches to do the best that they can do. And not everybody will get to the top of the tree, but everybody is important in making sport tick in this country. And for us, clearly the volunteer thing is something that we have, and we must promote that.
Mark, you wanted back quickly on,
just want a couple
some of the responses?
I hear, in terms of what John was saying, I certainly wasn't referring to disclosure checks in any way. I mean, having been a youth football coach and gone through the disclosure check, I know how important that is. The other point was around the, Alistair mentioned the SFA coaching badges, and I've been through them and I agree they're excellent. But one of the issues that I raised during the debate that we had in Parliament last week was around how we ensure that people get access to qualifications. How do we ensure that people who turn up as a volunteer to help out, maybe because their son or daughter is involved in the club, how do we ensure that they get access to the qualifications that will take them from the position of a helpful volunteer to somebody who can actually give back in terms of coaching, and they get the coaching qualifications necessary to make a difference. So that was another point that I was putting in there.
Any comment on that? John Lee?
Yes, Mark, I just want to say briefly, it's a very good point. I think one of the key things that we should be trying to do is to create pathways for volunteers. I mean, volunteers, generally, they're not looking for, you know, an award, a reward. What they want is a good volunteering experience, and part of that good experience is being able to progress within your role, within your sport. So you may start off doing something very unstructured, just participating, but as you say, you might want to improve your skills, become accredited, move on to being a coach. So I think it's very important, and it's one thing that we're trying to do within the framework, is to create these kind of volunteering pathways within individual sports and within individual sports organisations to allow people to build their skills and to build on their initial volunteering experience, and hopefully that will help to sustain their involvement in sport.
Do we need, you know, go back to that workforce planning, you know, any enterprise and business would understand their workforce, understand their skills, their range, they would audit, they would know how many volunteers that they had that were coaches on the front line, they would know how many administrators that they have. Now, apart from the household survey, is all of that other bits and pieces done by the sporting associations themselves? They'll know that. Who brings that together? What is the capacity? You know, we're all rushing about, we get the legacy going, increase demand. What is the capacity of that sporting volunteer network to deal with additional demand? Alistair.
I think it's a great question, and I think the answer is that we don't know. I can't think of many sports who would actually be able to say what the coaching workforce, for example, or what the technical official workforce, and particularly the volunteers. It's done now in a small number of sports, and indeed colleagues in Sport Scotland may be able to give you an answer, but my understanding is that that's not readily available. But it is important, and indeed, again, the Scottish FA in their recent Scotland United strategy, the first in 138 years, they do stress the importance of a coaching community, which ranges from those that, you know, literally as you're describing, right the way through to you know, the top level in terms of management. But I think your question about capacity is one that is vital that it's answered, because that tells you how much you have to do. That tells you the scale of the problem or the challenge in terms of grasping the opportunity of this, the time of our lives.
Is that the common experience about John Lee?
Just say, Convener, I think Alice is absolutely right. There's a lack of information. Studies tend to look at overall levels of participation in sport. They don't tend to drill down into the levels of volunteering in sport. And I think there is quite an urgent need to give us some kind of benchmark about where we are at the moment. Sport Scotland do some good work in that area. We try to do some work in it, but I think there needs to be a bit more of a focus on giving us a real snapshot of where we are with volunteering in sport at the moment, with the overall levels of participation. And that will give us a really kind of benchmark of that capacity that you've mentioned. Is
it something that the committee should look to, or you know, to make some recommendations there?
I think that'd be very helpful.
What would those recommendations look like then?
Well, I think it's the sort of thing that national governing bodies should be asked to do. It's not going to be easy, but I think they can make a fair stab at it as part of their development plans that go into Sport Scotland. And similarly, you know, clubs within Scottish governing bodies, again, have a conduit into their governing body, and it would give you some indication there.
Bob wants to follow up on that question.
Yeah, just very briefly, more at a local level in terms of unmet demand and how you forecast that. In Aberdeen yesterday, we heard about an area where there's a very successful youth football team up to the age of 12, and then there's no provision until the age of 19 or 20, and the kids, one or two of the best kids, go to another area and continue to play football. Everyone else just stops. So in terms of whose responsibility would it be to fill that gap? Would that be national governing bodies? Would that be local authorities? Would that be sports councils? Who's doing that mapping exercise at a local level? Because there's there's a black spot. There's a group of kids who have enough volunteers to keep teams going to the age of 12, and then it just disappears. So if there's not the capacity within that community or enough volunteers being supported in that community, whose job is it to actually look and promote that and take that forward? National governing bodies, local authorities, sports councils, who would that be?
They have regional development staff, and they certainly do in Aberdeen. You've also got the number of the Scottish Junior Football Association and the amateurs and the various associations. But I think you would find that there are opportunities within Aberdeen for 12 to 16. And that there will be local leagues that will be run. But I think, again, the question should be addressed to the Scottish FA, and I'm not speaking on their behalf, but I think that they would certainly know.
And it's not a criticism of the Scottish FA, whether it's basketball or cricket or whatever, it's just, it stops in that local area, and we took it away. The initial question was about elite sports and quality provision back down to grassroots sports, and that's an example of the very best players within a local area will go elsewhere to play, but then it just stops for everyone else. So whether it's football or basketball or cricket or tennis or whatever, would it be the national governing bodies, or do you say then would be best placed to identify where those gaps are and take the strategy forward rather than, say, local authorities?
Well, I think it's, again, working together. If you've flagged an issue, then it's the sort of thing that could be dealt with, together.
Don Lee?
Probably all of the above, but yeah, I think governing bodies do have a key role. We have discussions with our colleagues governing bodies about this, but I think only maybe 2 governing bodies in Scotland have volunteer development strategies and dedicated volunteer development managers. I know some of them are running a shoestring, but nevertheless, I think that's a potential way forward if governing bodies were developing their volunteer development strategies and having dedicated volunteers, development workers. Also, I don't know if a lot of local authorities have developed leisure trusts to arm's length organisations that have taken on a lot of sports development functions, and I don't know if that's created a bit of a gap between local authorities themselves and leisure trusts about who should kind of take forward sports development work in their area. So it's a kind of complicated picture, I think, which might maybe lead to those gaps that you've mentioned, but certainly a role for governing bodies, I think.
You can see where we're going here as a committee, because just in the written evidence and the submissions and everything else, we've got those games makers that we spent time speaking about this morning. We've got the trusts, we've got the local authority, we've got the hubs, we've got sports councils, we've got the sports clubs, we've got maybe wrong to say it is a cluttered landscape, and I suppose it is made difficult, to get coordinated activity there and meet that, that unmet need, and indeed target those communities where the participation by its demographic is very much lower. And we heard that in deprived areas, 25% of children leave primary school without being able to swim and stuff like that. And that's probably the tip of the iceberg. So. Richard Simpson.
To open up the area of, you've hinted at, convener, the cluttered landscape. Well, we've got 600 sports coordinators in Scotland now, and we are hopefully training, we've got fewer PE teachers, but we are training other teachers in PE. I think it was Judy Murray who said, you can't go into a class of 30 and actually teach them a sport, particularly if it's one like tennis or requires a degree of individual attention. And I just wonder, what we're doing in terms of linking up the school side and the PE side and the PE teachers with the sports coordinators into this lot that are volunteering. There are a lot of parents that want to get involved. Are the schools actually encouraging them, or are they still saying, hang on, at the school door, you can pick them up afterwards and drop them off before, but, are we using that as a pathway into volunteering at all?
I should recognise that we've got Alec Richardson and Liz McColeman with us here now. I'm sorry about the delays that you faced this morning, but we're delighted you've been able to make it. And, if any of you want to respond to that question of Richard's right away, then get warmed up, then please do so.
I think that obviously I'm coming in late and I've on the back end of whatever's been discussed, so we're not really privy to what you have discussed. But my main importance here is because you know, I'm an athlete, well, ex-athlete, and I was at the Olympic Games, as probably Judy was, and we got all this great big emotion about you know, the legacy of the Games and how we were all going to go back to our little corners of the world and, you know, have all these lovely children all well catered for in fantastic facilities, and it's just not happened. And, you know, my main sort of grief is the fact that, you know, we've got all these facilities in deprived areas, yet we're charging £3 from local councils to try and get kids to use it, and they haven't got that finance to use it. I went up to my local club the Tuesday after the Olympics that I came back. I had 120 kids. We had 3 coaches, no volunteers. We've still got 112 kids turning up on a Tuesday and Thursday night. Fantastic sight to see at Care Park Stadium. Never seen it in my life. And, you know, they're not turned away. But again, you know, how are we supposed to cope with that? And how are we supposed to keep that interest? And, you know, all sports that were involved in the Olympics, we're all fighting for our little piece of that pot. But for me, you know, athletics is the beginning of all sports. You know, we need to be getting into the schools and creating the buzz that we had at the Olympics, keeping that there and getting the inactive kids involved. And the only way you do that is by coordination and having coaches going into schools and actually delivering what sport is. You know, not going into a school and deciding, you know, when you get there what we're going to do with these kids. And you know, it has to be a programme that is led by professional people who then lead into the clubs, that then lead into, you know, providing for these school kids. And not only the school kids, you know, you're getting, and I'm getting university people coming up and I cannot accommodate them. And, you know, it's a shame that you can't accommodate an interest that is born out of what was a fantastic Games. And I think in Scotland we've got so many stadiums empty, so many doors lying shut. In Dundee, the track's only open a couple of days a week. If I want to go down on a Wednesday, I can't use it. It's closed for 6 weeks of the year, an all-weather track that is closed for 6 weeks of the year because of the snow. You know, it's ridiculous in this day and age that we don't have the facilities that we want. And if I cry for my little end of the pot, I've got, you know, 5 athletes that actually I think will be main players at the Commonwealth Games. I have no indoor facility during the winter for them, and I'm going to be faced again with trying to accommodate, trying to find a surface because the track will be closed because it's not maintained properly.
Alec Richardson.
Apologies for the delays. Spent 2 hours on the motorway, so I'm ready to go.
Bad this morning.
Briefly, my organisation is, apart from being very for the last 30 years, we've had a proven international track record in Olympic weightlifting. We're also a social enterprise where, you know, we deliver gala events, things like that, and the money goes back to support our sports side. We've been very successful over a number of years. The big problems we have is, and I'm backing up what Liz says, the volunteers is fantastic if it's structured right. We've got 12 wonderful coaches in our organisation who all have one thing in common. They've either been at Commonwealth, European or world level in their own careers. This year alone, from the East End of Glasgow, we've produced 50-odd Scottish, 50-odd British, 8 European medals. We've got a couple of people who's going to go into the World University Championships. Half a mile from our gym, in the last month, there's been 22 drug raids on houses. 9 kids last week were lifted for assaulting two police who were on cycles. We had 3 jumpers off motorway bridges, all in one weekend. That's the depravity we're facing there. And in terms of the Commonwealth Games legacy, people in the Easter House say, what is this legacy? Show me this legacy. I've got a letter here from the director, Bridget McConnell, the director of Glasgow Life, where we put questions to her via our local councillors, because she doesn't talk to people like me because you'd have to get through freedom of information. And this letter was regarding the Active Glasgow funds, that it's a joint initiative between this committee's funds, or the government's funds, and the local authorities' funds. It's head up by £4.8 million of Glasgow City Council money for sports development, an additional £750,000, which is allegedly supposed to go to community sports groups, although I don't know a community sports group that gets access to it. The £3 million education budget for physical activity was ring-road and put into that pot, as was £4 million of NHS physical activity money. Also in that pot, or led on through that pot, is your cash back for communities money. And the lead agency, obviously, is Glasgow Life, the local sports authority. Only Glasgow Life, to me, as far as I'm concerned, is a laundering exercise. They'll lead on the money, and it only goes to places where they know the money's coming back in. I'm making two full-time coaches redundant. We had 1 year's funding that ends this week, which puts substance onto our good, 12 volunteers, good quality volunteers we've got in the coaching system, but without the two full-time guys who will get into the schools, taking the taster sessions, starting a back shift at 12 o'clock, feeding the kids through, ending their shift in the local club. Without those two guys managing the sport, then the whole potency of the other quality volunteers we have falls dead, because they've got their own jobs to do. They can't be doing 101 things to manage it. Liz is right, there's got to be a structure. And that, what I find amazing is that in this letter here, when asked of roughly a £14 million pot of physical activity and sports development money, when the director was asked how much she'd spent in community sport, appallingly, for Glasgow, for 500 community sports, she admits here she spent a fantastic £25,000. Basically, community sports groups, we don't know this legacy. The Commonwealth Games legacy in Glasgow is for politicians and departments. They'll hail the fantastic new facilities that departments have there. The East End of Glasgow is supposed to be regenerated. Easterhouse and Bailison, we've been tagged with the murder capital of Western Europe. We've been tagged with the lowest life expectancy rate in Western Europe, with direct links through poverty and child obesity. There's not one, there may be facilities in the East End that Glasgow will say has been built for these games, but certainly not in Easterhouse, which was the very communities that they used to make a case for the Commonwealth Games. So you understand, Willie, I talk here with a bit, maybe too much passion for my own good at times, but the days are gone now where we're going to sit back. I've told Glasgow Life had offered us £3,000 last year towards coaching courses, and what I've basically told them is the days of you lot throwing us crumbs at the table when we're facing real social deprivation. Sport saves lives in places like Easterhouse, saves lives. We also run physical activity play programmes. Last year, we had thousands of kids coming in through the physical activity play. Now, they may not, there's this myth that if a kid's not involved in sport, they're not keeping fit, they have to be involved in the sport to keep fit. Not every kid wants to be involved in sport in the early days, but every kid wants to play, and if you put your physical activity through play, and then create that base where you can age progress into sport in later years. And we've been highly successful at that. We've got government reports that's coming out with years how successful we are. But we cannot access the funds that are there for physical activity and sports development, because the bottom line is this: we're the lead agency, we're Glasgow Life. We'll put it to where it's coming back. Now, let's take Glasgow Rocks. Brilliant, fantastic sport. Any sport's fantastic, it's kids off the street. But significantly, Glasgow Rocks is a client of Glasgow Life because they pay to hire out facilities for Glasgow Life. But Glasgow Rocks, who are a client of Glasgow Life will lead for them to access cash back for community funds. But while the money is being recovered for communities like Mines, groups like Mines don't see any of cash back for community funds. Why would Glasgow Life lead on my organisation? We run our own facility. We do our own development plans. Heaven forbid that, apart from feeding X amount of kids from our schools into our facility, but also any crumbs of income that comes in, we come into our facility and not Glasgow Life's. There's a laundering exercise here, and people have to take a right good look in the mirror and stop looking at tick box things that's coming in, and then everybody agrees the system's working well. This system is based, as far as I can see, with announcements that Shona Robson has made, is that there seems to be active schools is about quantity rather than quality. Quantity. We had an active, with the mascot launch for the Commonwealth Games in Easterhouse on Sunday, with two so-called city target sports there. The first one was gymnastics. The gymnastics club had to come for Irvine. So where was the gymnastics club getting fed in for the active school sports in Glasgow? It was non-existent. There was meant to be badminton there. We had 2 badminton coaches hitting a shuttlecock over a net. No kids there demonstrating. Why? Because there's no badminton club in Glasgow. The only worthy sport that was there was our own kids, and we had kids who were all 12 years of age, who are already been at European club level. These kids will still be 18-year-old if Glasgow is successful with the Olympic Youths in 2018. Were they invited to the launch of the 2018 Olympic Youth bid? Not in your life, because I'm East End of Glasgow for Easter House. You know, if there's any success coming from a community sports-based club, then the local authorities make sure that that success is buried at all times, because that could reflect badly. And people like you guys could be asked the local authority, why haven't you produced what these community groups are producing? Bridget McConnell, same letter again. She was asked, from your £14 million pot and 16 target sports, how many Scottish, British, European or world-class athletes did you produce? She's very proud to say 7 Scottish and 3 British. You know, we can win 50 times that from a 40 grand, small 40 grand budget. They're not producing. There's no quality coming through. None whatsoever. But meanwhile, like I say, sport from our organisation is a vehicle that saves lives, gets kids off street. We're not getting the funding. We're not being taken serious through here. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, and a great many people involved in our organisation will say, we don't see this legacy. We really, really don't.
Well, there's a challenge. You're not doing anything in the East End of Glasgow, or you're not doing anything in the East End of Glasgow, and these are deprived communities that need that support more than any other communities. Does anyone want to take that? Bob, you want to take that responsibility?
Well, I have to say, I'm not going to take that, Mr Richardson, but what I would ask is, given what you've said, you've done yourself a great service today by putting quite clearly on the record what you think the shortfalls are. It's a lot for MSPs to take in. As a Glasgow MSP, I'd be keen to meet with you as soon as possible after this meeting to discuss.
They'll never come here unless I can back up what I say. So
no, absolutely. So
feel free as long as you've got a nice.
Well, if you're hanging about after this meeting, perhaps we could have a meeting to discuss some of the details there, because I think it has to be taken forward in detail, and I'd be keen to do that. Yeah.
I've been 30 years. We started with organisation a coal cellar because we had no facilities. 30 years, and what I don't want to see is, basically at the end of the day, my board of directors were voluntary. I should say voluntary board of directors has given me licence for our organisation with a 30-year history to put our head above the parapet today, because we will probably be hammered when we go back now with the local authorities, because we dared to even raise these things.
So can we open that folder and discuss after this meeting some of the details? A lot of details we can put on
there. Absolutely. It's a committee meeting. It's not a surgery. So no, you didn't answer the person's concern, Bob. You offered them an appointment, and we'll all be interested in doing that. So so we can get back on. Can we get back on track to get the wider issues? I mean, the sports organisations and those that are here and the voluntary organisations are all culpable in what we've just heard, in that they are not linking with, or the accusation is that they are not doing enough in these areas like Easter House and other areas that need that greater support, that unmet need that you identified earlier. Sport takes place, and I suppose the accusation where it's more supported is in communities where there may be facilities, where there be parental a greater degree of parental buy-in and support and volunteer support and availability, and I suppose that's the challenge that we've just heard. What are we doing to meet that unmet need in areas like the East End of Glasgow, and I presume poorer areas of Dundee, which is a similar profile?
Example, I mean, it's not only Easter House. I mean, there's places all over Scotland that are the exact same. I can stand up and say the exact same thing for my club. That we're not getting the finances. We've got a clubhouse now that's derelict, and we're having to rent a toilet facility from the council at the track for the club. So, it's pretty much similar positions all over Scotland, and I think that this is the sad sad state of affairs that we're in now. We've got Scotland saying we're a great nation, and we've got you know, Andy Murray, and we've got all these great, fantastic sporting heroes, but they've not come from the development in Scotland. They've come from being very exceptional people that have took all the good, all the bad that's been around them and just excelled through it. They've not been supported in a way that, as a nation, we can support a lot of our good sportsmen and women. And the thing
Alistair,
is, because,
great. No,
because we're not
Alec,
supporting
we're going
the
to
top end,
have a discussion about it.
It's the school kids that should be getting involved and should get introduced to the sports that we're failing. You know, we've not got any legacy behind to follow all the, you know, where is the next Andy Murray? I don't see them. You know, where is the next Liz McColgan? I've never seen a runner come from Scotland now for 20 odd years. And it's not because we don't have the ability. I mean, I can go into a lot of schools and, you know, athletes are under my wing myself and say, yeah, they're great, but, you know, I have to go elsewhere to get the support that I need for them.
Alistair.
Yeah, that's, you know, both tremendous passion contributions, and I think get to the heart of perhaps some messages with regard to the community hubs. That's why there has to be a different model. You know, there is a real opportunity, you know, during these next 5-6 years, during, you know, the time of our lives and many others, to do something different. And the community hubs actually, as I said at the beginning, are in danger of giving us that opportunity. But don't apply the old local authority models, the old community development models, the sports development models, to where we are now, because the situation is quite different.
Well, some of the evidence we've had, Alistair, and, you know, and what we've had is a passion for a particular. I mean, I heard it from Judy earlier. What the interest was, the sport, that sport itself was the focus. The identity that it was your club, it was your baby, and whatever. And we've had some evidence, I think, and caution from sport clubs who are running, that while the hubs as an idea, and, you know, the advocates that we've had here have been very, very enthusiastic about them, about their potential and what they can bring about, the caution is that the passion, the commitment is locked up in that individual's club, and there's a concern, and we picked up a wee bit of that yesterday, that unless you're working and conforming to the hub and an accredited club, and they are this, that, or the other, unless you're on that inside track, excuse the pun, then you're an outsider. So that gives great challenges to those people who have devoted 20, 30 years to their particular sport and whatever. They don't necessarily, are they concerned at least about joining that hub because it's not theirs. It's somebody else's concept. And I think we've had some evidence that says, well, watch, that we've got some concerns about this. We don't necessarily want to conform to the hub, particularly early on when they are not clear about what benefits it would bring. John Lee, do you want to come in on this?
I would just say, Convener, we started off by talking about really the importance of grassroots kind of community sport and how it was really important to move away from the kind of big ticket state-of-the-art facilities towards making more opportunities and facilities open to these kind of grassroots organisations. And I think that's really where we have to go. It was really about, there was questions about affordability and support and easy access and really utilising the kind of existing facilities that we have. So I think it would be good to go back to those very early points that we made at the start of the session and really focus on them.
Anyone else?
Yeah. The real danger here, because I've seen all this before my time. I tried to create sports foundations way back in the late 80s, early 90s. Named they worked harder on those kind of concepts. But there's a real danger here that the community sports hubs, if the funding has been channelled through the local sports authority, it will just become a mere extension for the local sports authority. The little groups will get the crumbs, and it will appear that the sports authority is doing their job and assisting and supporting, but the real money will stay within the budget of the council to offset any cuts they've got from elsewhere. That's my feeling on it. And can I just finally say as well, in a perfect world, if we spend £1 billion a year in facilities and we had £500 million a year for coaches, in that perfect world, everything's still built in sand. Because for the places where I come from, if I've got a talented kid, I've got a girl just now who's 12-year-old, she's Scottish under-18 champion as well as British under-13 and under-16 champion. She's third at European club level. That girl now needs to travel to 5 or 6 British events a year. Her mother's got 3 other kids. She's in a low income. Her mother works, but it's in a low income. So does the 3 other kids miss out because the mother has to spend the money on the older sibling just to merely get them to the events? Now, for a couple of £1,000 a year supporting that girl, what you should have is a parent support fund for talented kids. Now, if there was 1,000 kids in 20 sports in Scotland with that kind of potential, the national budget would be maybe £2 million a year to help to support the parents, to support the kids. But instead, we'll spend billions on facilities. We'll spend 50 million, is it, in active schools. And it's all built in sand. And some parents feel really guilty. My kid lost out on that opportunity. My kid was talented, but I couldn't afford my kid to be going to London 5-6 times a year at £500 a pop. What decent parent would allow a 12-year-old girl to go down to London herself? So the parents having to go with them. The parents get a tail cost. They've got needs, you know. And a couple of £1 million of a small budget a year from this government could take that backbone away. Because with that wolf at the door, what you have there is poverty, no matter how talented the kid. Poverty is the unclimbable barrier. I was 6th in the world in 2 world finals. I would have won the World Championships if it hadn't been for poverty. I came up in Easterhouse. I treaded water for 4 weeks before I went to Canada for a World Championship just to get rid of an injury because I couldn't afford the £50 at the time for a physio. So at the end of the day, I know where I'm coming from. Poverty is the unclimbable barrier. No matter how good that kid gets, once it gets to a certain level, end of career. Or in the case of if it's an active school sport and there don't happen to be a local club in the area, as soon as the school bell goes, end of sporting career.
Chair, I'm really concerned about what Mr Richardson is saying there because, I mean, my understanding from our previous inquiry and indeed from this one is that the elite programme was one of the bits that was actually working reasonably well. Not perfectly, but reasonably well. And, you know, if we are still, if this is not just a one-off, if there are significant numbers of really talented young people who are not being supported to an extent of being able to participate in events which they are fit and ready for, then, you know, we really do have a very serious problem. And I think we need to go back to Sports Scotland and pose the question that Mr Richardson has just posed and invite the public out there and invite all the other organisations that if they have illustration of individuals who are performing at the level of this 12-year-old and are not being supported adequately so that their family circumstances are taken into account, let this committee know now so that we can take it into account.
How do you get on a Olympic funds?
Mr Richardson, you're on a roll, right. You're doing well, but I've got... Mr Richardson, there's nobody denying you your say here today. Absolutely. But there's other people who want to contribute to the...
I just want to say, you know, I admire your passion in that, but I think that we're getting a wee bit caught up in, you know, if you're going to, you know, 12-year-old kids we're talking about, and if you're on about funding and things, you know, we need to be very, very aware of what is available at what level that you're actually going to come in and fund. I mean, there's a lot of 12-year-olds that will think, you know, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to do that, and you'll throw £3,000, but then, you know, 2 years later they might not be in the sport. So you've got to look at the development of the sport and where they're going with it. I do believe there's, you know, councils should have like grant schemes or something that's available for travel and expenses on Just Cause, but not just for every talented 12-year-old, because the amount of young kids that I've seen go through my hands that I could say, God, they could be the next Seb Cole, but they don't stick at it. So, you know, you've got to be careful. You're dealing with children here, and you're dealing with investment. And so it's investment for future. It's not investment for now, it's investment for future. Where are they going to go? Is it an Olympics in 4 years' time? Is it a cycle in 6 years' time? There's a lot of other things you're going to bring into play on that. So I admire your passion, but, you know, it's not all about an age-related and what's available to that young, talented kid at that young age.
Bob, you want to pick up on some of that?
Just very briefly, Mr Richardson, again, I think you make an important point. Some of the preparations I did for today's round table was I had to look at the budget that was available to support elite athletes. I just give the numbers. How well the money is used is another matter, Mr Richardson. In 2011-12, the pot Sports Scotland had was 3.3 million. By 13-14, it's 5.2 million. Now, I don't know whether that even touches the sides or whether that's a fantastic commitment. I just merely give the numbers. I think what this committee could do was look at how various groups access that funding, whether it's done directly at a Sports Scotland level, whether a portion of it goes to local authority level to support individual athletes or whatever, but those are the numbers, and it's how we use that money most effectively.
I think it's more important that you've actually got, if you've got a couple of talented kids at 12-year-old, I would rather see a great coach in place where access can go for a group of kids that are that talented. That's where I want the money to go. I don't want £50 to pay for a bus ride to go down to London. I want to make sure that there's a pool of very talented 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, getting the expert advice, medical, nutrition, strength, condition, everything. There should be that in place and not about the monetary side of... I mean, I was from the poorest of area. I had no electricity, I couldn't afford shoes. I made it. You know, and that was just through dogged determination of not giving up. But you know, we should be away from that now. We should have facilities in place for people to go and get right direction and pathways through to senior level and where they're competing at the best of the world and reaching their full potential. Just now, we're falling short of allowing these kids to reach their full potential.
We've moved on to the elite programme. I don't know where you want to say anything about the elite programme, Judy, but our focus as a committee is about that other end, about maximising opportunity to get people active and opportunities in through that. And it does look at facilities, it looks at access and whatever, and it's community-based sport that, you know, we hope that if you get more and more people participating, then you'll get more and more people sticking at it, and as a consequence, we'll be in a position to help people to make it at the highest possible level. But no one else?
Well, I think if you're going to talk about the elite end, I'm completely like-minded with Liz in terms of that development age, which is probably somewhere between 10 and 14. I guess it depends on which sport you're talking about, but in my sport, it is so important that the best kids have not just access to a facility, and of course with something like tennis you need an indoor facility, and these are very expensive because they are big units, but you need the support structure around them in terms of the sports science input, which is great if they happen to be able to become part of the area or Scottish Institutes of Sport. But the key is the coach. The key is the coach who understands about the skill development and the stage of development that the child is in, to give them the skills that once they get to 15, 16 and the physical and the mental side start to kick in more after that, that they can get the maximum out of the skills. Because if you miss out on that skill development thing, you get mediocrity, and you're just investing in mediocrity, which doesn't get you anywhere. So I come back to the point that I made earlier about investing in people, and we talked about investing in volunteers and officials and coaches, and you know, strengthening the club structures so that people are working to a plan, that they get support. But we need to have world-class coaches. If we're going to produce world-class athletes, we must have world-class coaches. And in my opinion, we don't have that in Scotland. And I think that if I was talking about now where I feel like I am with tennis, I completely understand the journey from age 8 right through to the very top of the game. And it is not easy, and we've had to have a lot of different people involved in Andy's development over the years, inputting different things, but I come back to, he learned his skills in Scotland. It can be done there. I mean, once you get to 15, 16, you probably need a training base overseas where you can train outdoors. That requires money. There still isn't money to pay for that with kids coming through now, if they are good enough. If you still need £30,000 or £40,000 to go overseas, that money is not there. So go back to what Liz is saying and what Alex is saying. It's just a different sport, maybe slightly different scale with the money, but it's the same thing. If we've got the talent, we have to make sure that we can invest in the right people to nurture that talent and create the right opportunities on every step of the way, not just up to 14. Oh, you're pretty good at 14, but actually we've run out for you. We've got no facility, we've got no coach. So actually, unless your parents have got a lot of money, you're stuffed. So yeah, so world-class coaches is something that we need to invest in if we want to be a really successful sporting nation. And I would love to see us having Olympic athletes, because for me the Olympics is so much about athletics, and it kills me that we very few Scottish athletes at the Olympics this year.
Gil Patterson wanted a quick one, and I think Aileen wanted in as well.
It wasn't so much a quick one in this regard. It's on community sports, so I wouldn't like to interrupt the flow in this one. I'll come back if you don't mind, if anyone's got anything further to it.
Just actually on the point that Judy Money makes in terms of the need for having more world-class coaches, because I think that's absolutely fundamental. And I think Alistair also made a very good point earlier on in the discussion. You sort of saying you had over 100 kids turning up in Motherwell for the local athletics club with only 2 coaches. And given the amount of enthusiasm and interest that we're seeing generated from, you know, with the Olympics and obviously in the lead up to the Commonwealth Games as well, is how do we do it? How do we actually get that support into our communities to encourage and develop, you know, having more coaches who are able to, you know, take kids through as they develop their own kind of sporting abilities. I mean, I know, as Alistair mentioned earlier about, was it the leader coaches and the kind of level 1, so it's like as they kind of progress their training for developing as coaches, but I think the coacher training is absolutely fundamental.
The easiest way to learn how to deliver coaching well, whatever sport it is to work alongside somebody who knows what they're doing and is an effective communicator. And there's all sorts of things that go into being able to effectively communicate. But one is personality, one is desire, passion, knowledge. There are all of these things, and the most successful coaches tend to have big passion, good knowledge, and big hearts. But I think when you're working with young children, the fun element is absolutely crucial, because you can get kids to work hard while they're having fun if you organise and deliver in the right way. So I would say that it might be worth looking at some kind of mentoring scheme where you could apprentice coaches to assist Liz or to assist Alex, and you know, if they have a particular interest in their sport, to see how they deliver and to feed off that enthusiasm and that knowledge and that experience. Because if it was me, I would welcome that. If there was a student or you know, a 6-year pupil, or you know, whether it's just somebody who's already a coach but wants to learn how to deliver more effectively, then let's attach them to people who know what they're doing, because that is the best way to learn how to deliver.
Alistair, you want to make some additional points on that?
Just very quickly, and really, you know, supporting everything on that. You know, in terms of coaches, we still have a large number of volunteer coaches in Scotland, and that's good. But the commitment that they make in terms of the hours that they make is huge, and indeed is a big barrier to people who are, say, in work in something else, or indeed not in work, to actually spend additional time coaching. Certainly my experience, okay, the reward is important, but recognition is much, much more important, and you know, to work alongside an experienced coach to mentor them, so that they, you know, they feel they can learn from the best, and then to be recognised in whatever way their sport can or their community can, actually will sustain people in coaching much longer. And I think there are now very good professional development opportunities available for coaches through certainly some of the larger governing bodies of sport, and that's maybe, Alec, one of the challenges is that, you know, your own sport doesn't have the infrastructure of, dare I say it, a football or a rugby. But I think that this whole coaching has got to be absolutely on the top of the agenda for all of this stuff that you're talking about as a committee. And as you say, the variety and the range is huge. But unless any system has got coaching in its widest possible sense, from administrators to people who are actually working on the field of play, then, and the coaching philosophy, maybe even more importantly, that are keeping youngsters in sport, helping them to honour their game, changing the behaviour of their parents and the coaches and the teachers, unless that is being addressed through all the stuff that's going on in communities, we're not going to get the legacy that we deserve or indeed that we want.
Gil?
Convener, can I go back to volunteers? And it's a point that Mrs Murray made with regards, we certainly have lots of volunteers in sport, but it's a kind of changing feast. That although the numbers are fairly high, but the numbers, the people within it can change all the time. And my experience is that with my own family, when a child passes through that sport, then the volunteering that's given, although my wife doesn't, she says she doesn't volunteer, but she's out nearly every night. But you know, they tend to move out of volunteering, and contained within that element of people are people who have expertise and experience that maybe in one particular sport, but we can then, if my understanding right on hubs, one of the benefits that we get from hubs is people who are maybe volunteering to put forward administrative talents, then they could spread that to another sport. And I wondered what the panel's views were and what mechanisms we use to retain people like my wife who put a lot of time in, but I feel when my daughter moves on from gymnastics, we'll probably give up.
John Lee?
I think it's an excellent point. I mean, all I would say is that I think even just the word retain itself, I think is, and perhaps we should move away from that. We don't want to get a situation where we're kind of locking people into sport where it almost becomes a life sentence. I think we should be looking more at sustaining or maybe rotating people within sport, giving them different opportunities. So if they want to move away from a particular club or a particular sport, there's some pathway there where they can get involved in another area, in another sports organisation or in another sports club. So it's moving away from a kind of recruit, retain, model, a kind of based on a kind of workforce model towards more involving, sustaining, rotating people within organisations and giving them those pathways where they can move into different. Because I think burnout is probably still quite a big problem in a lot of sports clubs. Too much responsibility placed on volunteers. So we have to look at ways of managing that and giving people a greater pathway within individual clubs and within individual sports.
Mr. Richardson?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, the success that my organisation's had through the years is the school pathway to the local club is absolutely vital. And we're very good at what we do in that respect. However, there's quite a lot of sports being taught in the active schools just now. And the club in the community, it's not there, it doesn't exist. My idea of target sports should be if there's 2-3 sports in a certain area of a city, you know, and they've got the backing of the community, they've got a track record, they've got a history over years, then for that area, that should be the target sports. And that's where the pathway links with active schools should be working on. You know, and in terms of, I mean, there's 2 elements that you're working on. The first part is the logistics side of sports development. And I'm just showing you this quickly. We have 20 primary schools that feeds onto 4 secondary schools that all feed onto our weightlifting gym, which is falling down, which is the excellence base. You know, and kids find a level progressing through there. A lot of people will see, one of the big things I see is that we make sure there's a real top quality coach at the bottom level so that the skills are taught well from the very, very beginning. You know, we don't wait till the kids progress and then there's bad habits being formed and a technical ability, but you've made it to this level, now we'll give you a better standard of coach. So it's not the way we work. We make sure that it's quality from the very day the child is introduced to the sport and decides that they're enthusiastic and want to go further. I'm a great believer that X amount of funds for sports development should go, maybe the community hubs will be a structure for that, but should go to well-established amateur sports groups, because for a kick-off, number one, you know the pathway is there because you're funding the club. A sports club will be constituted to take a kid as far as they can to the top in their sport, whereas somebody that's teaching a taster session with a local authority, they see themselves as providing a service. Well, I was in the school today, I taught that sport, the bells went now, and I'm off home. You know, they don't have a club or anything to feed on it. So I think it's important that we should see, I'm not saying that, what I'm basically saying is every piece of funding shouldn't be taken as granted that all is done through the local authority and they deliver sports development. Find the well-run, the well-structured amateur sports clubs. Allow them to employ a developing officer or a coach. Let them get into the schools and bounce it back through the pathway that you know exists because you're funding them because they exist in the first place, rather on a theory.
Total sense. Total sense, because if I look at my sport, there's been an enormous investment into mini tennis, because you can play indoors with a wee bat and a sponge ball on a badminton court. But if there's no tennis court anywhere nearby, you do not get all of those kids that have tried mini tennis onto a full-size tennis court. So therefore, as a tennis exercise, it's wasted. So I completely hear what you're coming from, and I totally agree with the best coaches going in at the young age to develop the skills. Totally agree with that. It's absolutely crucial. And we don't do that. We don't do that enough.
We're going to have to bring it to a close now for them. But Mark, you had a question.
Just around some of the discussion that's been ongoing around the, I guess the theme would be equality of opportunity, and it's whether whether youngsters from deprived areas, does a 12-year-old from a deprived area have the same opportunity to get involved and access a sport as perhaps a 12-year-old from a less deprived community, and do we need to look at that perhaps in terms of, are we missing out on some of the stars of the future, because some of these youngsters at the ages of 12, 13, if they don't have that same opportunity to access the sport, there could be talent there that isn't being brought through and isn't being spotted because that opportunity isn't there. So I think that's maybe something we should bear in mind, maybe for future sessions.
Gavin wants to respond to that, Mark.
Things very, very truly with me as well. I mean, we're talking about geographical disadvantage there, but from our point of view, the disadvantage, it knows no boundaries with the kids that we're working with. The numbers that we're dealing with in some areas are very small, so the chances of them getting involved inclusively in a sport is probably minimal. So, the real battle that we have is to drive that inclusion agenda and to make sure that, the next batch of Paralympians, we've just had a fairly successful Paralympics. We've increased our numbers, more athletes, more sports, but where's the next generation coming from, and how do we provide good local opportunities for them? So that level of disadvantage exists within other areas. It's not just geography as well.
Anyone else? I'm going to have to bring it to a close. I think I've enjoyed the consideration this morning, and sharing the experience, learning from your experience, and indeed in all of the evidence sessions here, the passion and commitment that people have for their particular sport, their area, their club, comes across every session that we've had here. And I suppose the challenge for us all is to be able to harness that passion, enthusiasm, and get better outcomes for as many people as we possibly can. And hopefully that we can reflect some of your ideas, concerns in our eventual report. I would like to thank everyone who has given time to come along here today. And at this point, we've all had our questions. It's always dangerous to open up when you're, but hopefully briefly, if there is something that you came to say that you haven't been able to get on the record because we haven't asked those questions, you have got that opportunity now just to mention that, put it on the record, or indeed, if you feel that you've got some reflections of this committee session, then please informally email us, stay in contact with this inquiry. We urge you to do that. Is there anyone got anything that they would like to place on the record that they feel that we haven't covered in our session today? Are we okay? Just desperate to get out of here, then. We've got our next session. Thank you very, very, very much indeed for your attendance and your participation today. Suspending at this point. Right, now we can now reconvene the meeting, and we now move to our second round table of the day. And again, can I thank the participants and our witnesses today who are attending. And again, I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves as we go around. And can we start again with Mark? Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, Mark MacDonald, MSP for North East Scotland.
Jane Blanchard, Le Harbour Sports Association.
Richard Simpson, MSP Mid Scotland and Fife.
Gordon Crawford, Active Stirling.
Aileen MacLeod, MSP South Scotland.
Mark McGeehey, Project Officer with Robertson Trust.
David Torrance, MSP Kirkcaldy Constituency.
Gil Patterson, MSP Clydebank Mulgai.
Diane Cameron, South Scot, Social Enterprise and Sport Coordinator.
Lynette Milne, MSP for North East Scotland.
Drew Smith, Glasgow MSP.
Cerys Anderson from Street Games.
Bob Doris, MSP for Glasgow.
John Herity, Scotland Manager, Sported.
And Duncan McNeil, MSP for Gaeltacht Inverclyde. And we're going right to Bob, just to open us up and get us started. Bob, please.
Yep, Convener, I'll try and make the question fairly brief given the time constraints we may have this afternoon. One of the discussions we had towards the end of the first panel was how you best invest to support wider sports participation on the ground, but at the same time you take young athletes and sports persons from that local grassroots level through to an elite level. So how do you feel the best way to achieve that? We've got a number of funding providers in the room today. We heard that there's around £5 million or so spent each year in promoting elite athletes. So how can you just give some initial comments on how you think that's been taken forward? So boosting local participation, but the link we have to successful elite athletes.
Mark. I think from the evidence that the Robertson Trust has from funding projects, there's where we see there being a link into sport development pathways. These pathways are actually very well established through governing bodies, through local authorities, and I think our objective is trying to widen the participation and widen access and equality of access. And one of the ways in which we do that is to try and support a youth work approach in sport, where people who have been turned off from sport in whatever capacity, either through schools or a negative experience, have another opportunity to be supported into those pathways. So, for example, we had a recent event where we had youth workers and sports organisations working together to deliver a mass-scale taster event. And it was delivered in a school environment on a Friday night. Perfect diversionary time. However, there was a lot of young people outside who just didn't want to come in because it was in school, and I won't tell you the words that were used, but they'd spent all week trying to avoid being in the place, and they weren't going back on a Friday night in their own free time. And one of the things that we have found through our Youth Work and Sport initiative, which we've funded with the Rank Foundation for the past year, and through Girls on the Move, is that where you open up access by going into environments where young people choose to be, in youth clubs and youth work environments, then the relationship that is developed between the young people and their youth worker can help facilitate their access into these traditional sports pathway environments, where young people who have the ability and the desire to want to progress onto an elite pathway can be fed into that, where there's others who just want to participate for the fun and enjoyment can choose to do that as well. So it's about trying to find the right mechanism, and the one that we support is this youth work approach.
Anyone else? John?
Yeah. I think the way in which that we would support that would be when you're working with groups and sports clubs in areas of disadvantage. Sometimes those groups are quite fragile. They're relying on maybe one person or a couple of people to keep them going. And one of the things that we try and do, are interested in doing in Sported, has been able to develop those groups as sustainable groups, so that they've actually got a business plan that sees them beyond the next 6 months, that actually can put together a plan that sees them beyond, that they can see where they're going to go in the next 3 years or the next 5 years. And then really it's up to them when, if there's young people who want to participate and want to use that sports group as a way of developing themselves, developing their confidence, developing their skills, and more they're using sport to develop their life skills. That's something that they want to do. But then, like as Mark says, is if there's some of the young people in those groups want to take on a kind of a pathway into something more elite, that's there for them. But the key for us is really having a really robust a structure to the group, and then that's how that can progress.
Yes, Bob.
Yeah. The reason for asking that was because we are trying to focus on grassroots participation, but one of the things we've heard a number of times is that there will be provision for a number of years in a certain sport, and then it just falls off a cliff because there's no joined up local provision. We heard from Judy Murray in the last session talking about they try to be very careful where they do some of the kind of tennis coaching, because there's no point in giving kids a taster session in tennis. They get enthused by it and then they leave school and there's nothing in the local area. It's not money well spent. And Alex Richardson making the same point about the Active Schools Network having to be careful when they give taster sessions that they don't get kids enthused about a sport that then once the bell rings at 3:30 or whatever, there's nothing available in the local community. So in terms of the taster events, Mr McGeechy, for example, would you make sure that that pathway is there before you funded in that, so that it wouldn't just be a case of 8 weeks or 12 weeks of that participation, but then there's no progression after that? Is that something you do?
In that specific example, what we were trying to do is bring together sports groups and youth work groups so that there was a capacity there to facilitate that ongoing participation. And it's not necessarily in the sports club, the youth club, the youth work organisation themselves, if there is enough of a demand for recreational participation, can then provide that opportunity. And through that, a youth work organisation as well, there's the opportunity to empower young people to undertake personal development opportunities, sports leadership awards, youth achievement awards, dynamic youth awards, where they are then developing as individuals as well as within their sports, so that then increases the capacity within that community to meet that recreational participation need. And from our perspective, if there's a demand there within that community that then is being met on a recreational basis, you have local development officers in sports that can then tap into that and create a pathway from that on into their wider regional and national pathways as well. So I suppose in a nutshell what I'm saying there is it doesn't have to be a sports organisation, it can be a youth organisation as well.
I think Diane Cameron was wanting in.
Yes.
First of all, and then I can follow up.
I think it's an interesting one. I mean, round the table, obviously, the invited panellists here, we're all partners, and our role is to really support community sport as best we can, and we try to do as much of a joint-up approach, and we'll often signpost to one another. It's very difficult, kind of coming back to the question about do we not do taster sessions if there isn't a club in the area? We're such a rural country. If you talk to lots of the clubs in the Highlands and Islands, the kids might get a 4-week taster session, but there isn't anything to follow up. But that's in lots of sports. They could end up with just 2 sports that they've ever tried if they never ever get taster sessions. Now, it is a challenge because you have to have volunteers to start a club and they have to be committed to start that club in that particular sport. But it would be a bit of a sweeping generalisation to say never let them try a new sport just because there's no club in the area. That would really worry me quite a lot. It's kind of going somewhere else with that, but that is a bit of a challenge.
Yes.
I work for an organisation called Street Games, and we're a charity. We're just sort of starting to grow in Scotland, but we've got a lot of projects in England and Wales that are only situated in areas of high deprivation, where I would agree there's not a lot of infrastructure, and there is a lack of local clubs. So perhaps that relates, and also in rural areas, to the question of can you provide taster sessions if there's no exit route for them. But what we try to do, which again follows on to lots of the suggestions this morning, is really kind of to grow local clubs through young volunteers. And by club, we don't necessarily mean a building with a roof on. A club can be something that meets on a park, on a multi-use games area, even car parks. We have activities taking place, but it's really about supporting that volunteer infrastructure to be in place so that there is sustainability. So it's about supporting volunteers and about helping them to become sustainable.
Gordon Crawford, I think you wanted in.
I represent Active Stirling, which is a leisure trust within the local area. And just picking up on the widening sports participation, our real philosophy is looking at building communities. And we're trying to do that by utilising the contribution of PE, sport and physical activity to do that. And what we're trying to do is make linking our local communities, and we have broken that down into clusters. And what we're trying to do is influence all different facets of the pathway, from nursery provision through to primary school into secondary, which we in Stirling have failed to influence increased participation in secondary. So we've come up with a new model to try and shape and change that. And we're really looking at providing a better service in the community. We have what we call club development officers linked into every one of our local geographic clusters. And these people are in and amongst the local clubs. They work with the local clubs and we're responding to what they are requiring to support the club. So if it's increasing volunteers, if it's recruiting officials, if it's developing training pathways for some of the officials within the clubs, these people are facilitating that happening. We really see them as the club development officers as animating in the local community. They are the conduit in making links with our partners and the partners today around the table. But we're in a very luxurious position in that within our small geographic area and a population of only 90,000 people, we have active schools coordinators, primary, we have secondary school sports coordinators, we have club development officers, sports-specific development officers, coaching manager with a coaching staff and a coach education officer, an outdoor team and a performance sport team. So it's a lot easier to have a vision for PE, sport and physical activity and link that. And at present, with the one area of the continuum we're trying to bring closer to what we're trying to do is through PE. We're using the PE support money through Scottish Government, Education Scotland, Sport Scotland to appoint a PE manager and align PE closer to sport and physical activity. And we're trying to look and shape at what we do for sport. What is our sporting community? Is a school or is it a community for activity, sport and learning to happen? And we really are trying to target in on what the learner's voice is. What are their requirements, and try and link what we can do for PE, sport and physical activity to the contribution of the health and wellbeing agenda as well as the education agenda, and try and embed ourselves within education. Primary schools well catered for. I would agree with this morning's debate that we need to do a bit more with physical education within primary schools and really support physical literacy better. But from a secondary point of view, that's where we have a real participation drop-off, and we see that as the area that we really need to get right. And we can do that through Community Sports Hub, but also using the framework at Active Stirling and the staff that we have to work with our communities, not give them something that we think they should have. We want them to influence and shape how we're trying to build our communities.
Gil's coming in at this point, but it's just a question that arises. I mean, I think we saw some of the tension of that we'd all have this ambition, you know, that almost the professionalisation. We want better organisation with better use of the resources, better coaches, you know, and inevitably sometimes that means that we're going to have to professionalise that. And there's how do we professionalise that and still harness the tremendous enthusiasm and commitment that we have in the voluntary delivery of these sports clubs?
We've tried to link that. We've got the professional officers, but it's not to the detriment of our volunteers. We value the volunteers. We have a vibrant volunteer workforce within what we do within Active Stirling, and we also work in partnership with our local sports council, which changed its name to Club Sports Stirling, which they felt was a name which represented what they were involved in, which was sport and clubs. rather than being labelled a council, and people stayed away. By changing the name, we had a lot more people getting involved in what we're trying to do, and there was a really good there is a good partnership between Active Stirling and Club Sports Stirling, and we've really invested in the last 10 years on club sport, so much so Active Stirling have a service level agreement with Club Sports Stirling where we give them £34,000 to reinvest in through work plans with the clubs, whether it's in club development or whether it's in coaching and volunteer development. And our officers are the conduits to help support the clubs to put together good proposals with that. But we really do value the volunteers, and we're looking to involve. We have a mixture of professional officers and volunteers working together, either within the clubs or within the school estate, primary and secondary.
We heard from the earlier session that, that even from the best of the organisations who deal, in delivering programmes, Bristol programmes, that we don't, while we all value the volunteers and plaudits and whatever, that we don't really know who they are, what their skills is. There's no workforce planning, despite the fact that many of these sports are delivered by those volunteers, and we've heard about the fragile nature of some of them. There's no human resource management, in terms of how we support them to do their job, what their skills gaps are. There's no, has anybody got, Jane?
Sorry, I wanted to go back to an earlier point, which has come up.
Can we keep on this theme then, just in terms of how we support volunteers? Or, if
well,
you're going back to an earlier point,
yes, the
ASCs
and the pathway point, because two people so far have already highlighted the fact that primary schools are very well catered for in terms of ASCs, and certainly in Loch Harbour, which is all I can speak for, we have a fantastic group of ASCs going into the primary schools doing these taster sessions. I'm not totally aware of how many of them actually lead on to further sports. But then the problem is when the children go to secondary school, it seems throughout the Highlands, I don't know whether it's the same in the rest of Scotland, there is one ASC who works one day for each secondary school. So for Loch Harbour High School, which has 900 pupils, there is one ASC who goes in for one day trying to organise activities for 900 pupils, encourage them into sport and healthy activity. They can't do it. And it must be incredibly frustrating for them because they can't achieve anything within that time. And it's at secondary school level where we really need to concentrate. At primary school, children are supported by their parents. They're willing to try new things. They're driven everywhere by their parents to do whatever activities are on offer. But when they get to secondary school, the nature of the beast is that they're much more independent, want to do their own thing. And unless they're led into activities and there's a real proactive movement to get these children into, and I'm not just going to call it sport because a lot of children find that term quite scary, because sport is, for people with rippling muscles doing athletics at the Olympics. It's healthy activities and all the other things that go with doing sport, discipline, working together as a team, becoming a valuable member of society, all of those things, self-confidence, just calling it sport doesn't cover all of that and doesn't encourage general children to take part. And active school coordinators would need to dedicate an awful lot of time to encouraging that, and they simply can't do it, one day for a whole high school.
We heard, this is what I heard earlier, in a very passionate sort of intervention, that when someone running a local community sports club with success, by anyone's terms, looks at the budget and sees that £2 million has been, been spent in sport and education, such and such has been spent here, such and such has been there, and the pejorative way that Gordon Crawford's 34,000 would be played into the club, and 34,000 out of those millions actually arrive. Now, it's much more than that, just a simple transfer of money. But that we've heard today that there is quite, in some areas, quite a serious split between what we see as a professionalisation of sport, the delivery of sport, and how community clubs, some community clubs, view that professionalisation. Is Diane?
I think there are two distinct things. I think there's community sport run by community clubs, and then there's sports development. Club development officers, perhaps Active Stirling, there to support the clubs. I think we in this country are completely reliant on the clubs to deliver community sport. I think a lot of those, probably all volunteer driven, a lot of those guys, they actually don't really need a very regular pat on the back. They also probably don't want to be paid for what they're doing. A lot of them actually say, well, if I got paid, I wouldn't want to do it. But what we could do with doing is helping them with all the non-coaching stuff. So helping them with all that, getting them some money to do a feasibility study, let them maybe have a look at taking on their pitch. Let them create their own pavilion so they have a home. Let them become a real rooted in the community sports club. They could do with all that kind of help. They maybe want the help, maybe a part-time development officer to help them make the links with the NHS, the active schools, the social work department. That might be where the professionalism comes in, and that person could maybe look at all that, the messy stuff, the accountancy stuff. But the coaches, I think if you ask them, they really don't want to be suddenly, 10,000 paid sports coaches in this country. They do it because they are passionate about sport. But there's a whole lot of stuff that we could help them with.
Yeah, it was pretty much a pitch. I don't know where you were here earlier on, but it was a big question on how the budget was allocated, and how they were at the lower end of that, I think, was part of that problem. And they feel that the work the Gladiators do is going to suffer detrimental damage, because all of the budget is going into some of those areas that, so there is a tension, put it no stronger than that. And one piece of evidence, not my evidence, but evidence was brought this morning. I was just seeking some views on that, and I welcome yours. Yeah. Yes, John.
I mean, I think the key thing for us is that the groups that we work with, whether they're sports groups or whether they're youth groups, whether they're arts groups that want to do something that's got physical activity attached to it. The thing that's really key for us is that they're managing and are able to inspire young people. And that's the key thing, is that, so then any structures you put in place are really just there to facilitate that, not to stop them. Because the key thing is that they're doing the real hard job. What they've done is they've managed to engage the young people. They've managed to engage hard to reach young people. So anything that you can do, or anything an organisation can do, is really to facilitate them to continue to do that, not to put obstacles in their place. And I think that's the key thing, so they can be inspired, and they've done that hard work. And I think Dan's right around some of the business side of that. Other people can do that. Volunteer business mentors can do that to help them with that, and let them get on with the thing that they're passionate about, and the way in which they're making a difference to the young people.
Gil?
Yeah, can I go back to Mr McGeechy's question? Something you raised in the very first contribution. I think you're talking about people, young people who are hard to reach. And since the government's plan is to create 150 hubs, and they're going to be centred around schools, which is natural because most of the facilities, good facilities, are located within them. So if it is the case that there is a barrier, and we as a committee and the government, and I think we all want to really get the benefit to the folk that really need it the most, the hard to reach. If there is a barrier there, how do we overcome it? I know your organisation, the Robertson Trust, has got a lot of experience in that area. Could you say a bit more about that we can put in the public record, how we overcome that barrier?
Certainly. I think that there's 2 points to or 2 points to raise. There's an issue around facilities, and there's a lot of talk about accessibility of facilities, and in many occasions that comes back to financial accessibility. But one of the things the Trust has found, not just in the projects within sport that we support, but across the country in whatever sort of sphere of working, that, for example, the best way to highlight it as an example, there's a fantastic facility in Raploch, the new community campus, which was built to help regenerate the area. We fund a number of projects that work out of there, and I apologise now that they're not sports projects, but when I visited them last year, they spoke about the tremendous difficulty they had in getting people who live just across the road from coming into the facility. I mean, the best possible facilities that you can imagine if any of you haven't been there, but there was this issue about ownership and about feeling that they're welcome in there, and that is reflected a lot in the work that we fund within sports organisations, where community groups, the facility in the building is only one part, but the people that are put in that and that are from the community and know the community want to work with young people or old people or anyone in the community to help them feel that they're a part of it. And going into the area where we have more expertise around youth work and engaging hard to reach young people, the evidence from Girls in the Move found that one of the critical success factors that Youth Scotland identified was that by having that relationship with community organisations across the country, youth work organisations that were then able to speak to young people in their own terms and say, well, what would you like to do? You don't want to participate in rugby, football, netball, or whatever that may be, but what would you like to do? And then working with them to identify an activity. And some of the examples were obscure things like boxercise, yoga, table tennis. Sorry, excuse me a second. Dance was incredibly popular, but traditional team sports weren't something that a lot of these girls, and they were characterised as being hard to reach because of any number of reasons, from social index of multiple deprivation, rural isolation, or just simply they've been hard to reach because they've been turned off sport. But that then led on to the Robertson Trust and the Rank Foundation funding a programme called Youth Work in Sport, where we are funding 6 community sports organisations across the country, and they've identified a young person between the age of 18 and 25 who's from that community. And then they're being funded, they're paid as a full-time member of staff and being funded to undertake a youth work diploma, and now a number of them are going on to do the degree. But one of the key things that came out of that in this first year, the prime example, was from Reach from the Sky basketball in South Lanarkshire, where the young trainee, as I was calling them, but the youth worker there, Aaron, was beat up in his own community. He didn't do well in school, was pretty much written off, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing that with you. But now he's gone back into those schools where he worked. He's seen within his community, and young people can aspire to be like him because they can share his journey. A lot is also spoken, especially with the Olympics, about the impact of role models and elite level athletes. There's actually a lot of evidence that role models within communities have a stronger impact on engaging those that aren't of their own volition going to choose to participate in sport. So that's maybe a very long-winded answer, but I hope that there's something in that addresses your question.
To respond as well to your question.
Okay.
Kel?
Yeah, I'd just say that from the street games perspective, I'd echo a lot of the things that Mark has just said. All of our projects are based within areas of high deprivation, and we find that we sort of say all our provision is what we call doorstep sport. So it's at the right time, the right price, the right place, and in the right style, which sounds very basic, but it is actually, to sport, sometimes thinking outside the box. You don't necessarily provide football on a Sunday morning because that's the way it's been done for 100 years. It may need to be on a Friday night at 8 o'clock because that's when the young people want to come. The style isn't necessarily all skills and drills because that isn't what necessarily maintains their interest. It's about teaching skills, but in a fun approach, in a game-led approach, doing things in friendship groups. And it's very much about having local role models and making sure that they're accessible, because I would say in areas of deprivation, a lot of people don't have parents to drive them to sessions. The children have to get there on their own steam. So having a fantastic facility a few miles away isn't going to engage them. It's much better if you can provide a session using a local, you know, might be a community hall, it might just be a tarmacked area. So I would support most of the things that Mark said, but yeah, it's very much about encouraging those local role models who will be the Pied Piper that will keep people coming along.
Anyone else wish to respond to Gil's? Diane?
I'll just briefly say that I think the community sports hub idea is a fantastic thing, and I hope it's a long-term strategy. But a lot of young people, as Mark has already said, will not want to go into school. They don't want to go to school during school time. They certainly won't want to go there to participate in sport. You'll find I work with 60 sports social enterprises across the whole country, working in all sorts of different areas. And you'll find that the young people maybe engage with that club, and then the club will develop what they need. So they might do an NVQ there. They might go for a local jobs club is based in another sports club. They'll engage with activities there that they wouldn't otherwise engage with, because they don't. That's out with school. That's not something that's the school itself can be a barrier. But going to the local football club, you know, that's maybe something that's a bit cool, or you know, they'll sort of hang out there. And a lot of organisations are channeling them back towards education and to stuff that's useful for them. But in the school really can be a big barrier. Even kids who maybe aren't disengaged don't want to go back there out with those hours, you know. So having that option of something like a community sports club that isn't school-based, you know, it can be quite valuable.
Gordon, you get some comments on that?
I would agree about the school becoming a barrier, but rather than using that as a problem, why do you try not to use that to problem solve? And it's what we break down the perception of the school being and the estate of the school being for me. And it's, I think it's linked to when they go back to the school, if they're going to take part in sport, it can be quite curricularised. So if they do PE at school and they enjoyed sport, it's all formalised, and there's an exam at the end of that, and it's not actually playing sport, it's the theory of sport and practice and how you would lead and coach that. And that for us in Stirling, we've tried to get away from that, and we've been working with one of the high schools as a pilot to offer preschool activity, lunchtime and post-school in secondary schools only. And it's about playing sport or officiating at sport and trying to foster school clubs. And because community clubs can be quite a threat to young people because it's formal. It's surrounded by old people. It's people in a different dress sense than us, and you have to be on time and you have to finish at a certain time. And school clubs and creating a different environment within the clubs, within the schools that may meet the needs of people there is great. I would also agree with what you said about using different activities in Stirling, and particularly at Raploch. The school pilot we're working on, it's linked to the PPAS model, which is PE, physical activity and sport. We've got a new head of PE at Wallace High School, which is PE, physical activity and sport. So PE is a core part of that, but it's using the partnerships and sport and physical activity to help support what PE are trying to do, but also saying that it's not just about physical education, it's about taking part in sport and how we use the facilities within the school to do that. And we actually try and think that we're trying to link in the clubs with the PE and sports department. We have a secondary coordinator in every high school. And Jane had mentioned it's a real problem. They may only have one day a week, but we've tried to link that person not just being within school time, but being before school time and after school time. And the approach is about the partnerships delivering PE, sport and physical activity, and it's shifting the model of what that is and using school clubs to link into, before it used to be school to club links, we think it should be school club to club links, and trying to create partnerships there where the community clubs come in and support the school clubs and help the young people who are trying to be new leaders, be new coaches, to take part in sport and have fun.
Anyone else wish to respond to Gil on that one? No? Mark? Oh, sorry, Jane.
And as it's gone on, there have been quite a few points that I wanted to comment on. But one is accessibility to school facilities is a problem. We're very lucky. We're just coming to the end of a feasibility study on building an indoor training facility, and all the clubs chose, and the community chose, that it should be on the school estate, so linked into the existing school facilities. Even though it's an acknowledged problem with the clubs at the moment that there is very limited access to the existing school facilities for them to make use of them for training. So what we're now doing is working up what we hope will be a management committee, not just for the new indoor training facility, which is ostensibly a community facility linked into the school estate, but a management committee that will look at accessibility to all the school facilities that will be drawn from the local clubs, from the parent council at the school, and probably led by the head, so that we can together work out how clubs and community can gain access to all the facilities at a price that they can afford. And I think that's absolutely critical. I think, you know, however wonderful your facilities are, if the clubs can't afford to use them, then they're not going to use them. And a lot of it will, someone mentioned this problem of this feeling of ownership about facilities. A lot of it seems to depend on the actual head of the school. Again, we're very lucky we have a very good relationship with our head. But if the head is kind of precious about the facilities, then it's going to be very awkward for the community to get in. Diane and somebody else mentioned this whole problem of pupils going back to school to do an activity being a problem. They don't want to be there in the first place. I think that's the going back to school which is a problem. Once children leave secondary school, a lot of them will go home, maybe go on Facebook or whatever. That is it. I think if there are going to be after-school activities, and I think the idea of clubs coming in and leading after-school activities is a fantastic enforcement of that pathway from schools to clubs. I think it has to be immediately after school. I think that it has to roll on from school, but you're getting the outside element in with the clubs. So it's not, you know, the school teachers or whatever doing it that they've seen all day. And then if there is an interest, then those children will then go on to the clubs themselves off the school premises. But it's good to have that kind of crossover from school to club, using the facilities that are there at the school. You know, it's a good economy of resources to have all those facilities there.
Yes, Joe.
Yeah, the only thing I would say on the sports hub point is I think that they are a cracking idea, but I don't think they need to be in schools, and I think sometimes they don't even need to be in buildings. And I think that's quite important as well. It can be a group of people, a virtual hub as well. It's a group of people that are really interested in sport and really interested in developing it. And I think you don't want, again, going back to your point, them to then become a structure that becomes a barrier for hard-to-reach young people to get into. So I think there's lots of different models for the sports hubs, and I think that's the important thing, is to try and keep those models open. And see what the communities and what the young people want the hubs to be. And some of them might be in schools, some of them might not be, and they might be in other places, they might be on the street, which is another interesting way of looking at it.
Mark?
Yeah, it was actually to go back to a point that Diane Cameron was making around support for clubs, organisations, from the sort of the administrative angle, and an example sort of came into my head from my own experience, where before I was elected to the council in 2007, back sort of 6 years ago, I was involved with a group called the Dice Sports Development Trust in Aberdeen, who were looking to, it was brought together things like local youth football, the amateur football, the bowling club, the gymnastics, and they were wanting to try and develop a sporting facility on an area of land that had been set aside for a community sporting facility. but these were a group of willing volunteers who were trying to negotiate leases, develop business plans, unlock funding, find where they could get funding from, with very limited support, if any support, in that respect. And I think the point that Diane Cameron was making around how do we assist these sort of willing groups of volunteers to enable them to do all these kind of things, because you're relying on either having people who are experts in some of these areas, or being able to find people who are willing to join your efforts, who are experts as well. And in some areas that will be easy. I mean, in some communities there are obviously there are going to be people who are involved with clubs who have, for example, a strong accountancy background, who can be the club treasurer or things like that. But in some communities you just don't have that. So I guess it's maybe, we were speaking about in the first panel session about whether governing bodies need to do a sort of a skills audit, as it were, of the volunteers that exist within their area. And maybe this is an area that needs to be looked at in terms of where are the gaps in terms of what community clubs need by way of support, and how does that then get delivered? Who are the correct people to deliver that?
Yeah. Just to give you a bit of background, I'm actually employed at Science Scot. We're all about social enterprise, but I'm part of an initiative that's between Sport Scotland, the Robertson Trust and Science Scot, and it's all about supporting community sport that wants to adopt a social enterprise model. Now, Science Scot are really all about connecting folks together. So, because there's just one of me, and I do all of Scotland and all of sport, all the sports, which is an awful lot. My job a lot of the time is to signpost, and there is actually an awful lot of support out there, and maybe that bunch of clubs didn't know that, but it is sometimes hard for them to find out how they can get help. So there's an organisation who are funded by the government to help community groups take over leases, negotiate with the council about the asset, whatever. People don't know that. There's help from the third sector interface, there's help from myself, there's help from Just Enterprise, there's lots of help, but it's about how we connect the clubs who have the need to the different support. So whether it's Winning Scotland Foundation with their mentoring, or Sported with their mentoring, or the Just Enterprise programme, they need to know in a kind of easier way where to get that help. People phone me up regularly going, how do I find out? But that's because maybe they've heard about someone, so they can get my number. I don't even know how easy it is to get my number, So we need to make it easier.
Is there a role in this for the local authorities then? Because you're mentioning a number of different organisations, but again, it's about knowing that these organisations exist and being able to access them. Whereas if local authorities were more proactive, perhaps, because when you're negotiating a lease, often it's with the local authority that you're trying to negotiate that lease. If the local authority is in a position to say, well, have you looked at these organisations who might be able to support your group in its efforts? Is there a role in that maybe local authorities should be taking more of a role in terms of the signposting element?
I think it
discourage the conversation across the committee, but please respond, because John's wanting in as well, and some others will want to respond to your original question, Mark.
I think it's a difficult one with the local authorities. Which department would that sit with? I think collectively we all need to take a responsibility to make that information more available. So Sport Scotland's redeveloping its website. We maybe have to have more robust support from my organisation. We need to get better. In the third sector interfaces, they need to get better at connecting and making their, the range of services they offer. But I think to say the local authorities should take on that role, that's a bit of a burden, and which departments do you make responsible for that? But I think we all need to start looking at a more joined up way of thinking and communicating.
John?
Yeah, just 2 points on it. I think that goes into Diane's point. I think one of the things that with local sports groups and sports clubs, I think one of the skills that we can develop them in is networking, and almost kind of taking them out of the sports world and seeing what other worlds are there out there that they can get benefit from, whether it's a wider sort of voluntary sector world or whether it's other development pieces as well. Because I think there's lots of stuff that they can benefit from there. I think in terms of how do you match up mentors or volunteers in rural communities. Some of the work that we're trying to do is provide business mentors for local sports groups, and a lot of those are based in cities where we've got groups and where we've got mentors. And some of the things we're thinking of trialling over the next period is being able to have mentors who are in one part of the country and a group in the other part of the country, but we're finding a virtual way that they can mentor and use technology, so that you can have a group that is maybe quite rural, but their mentor might be in another part of the country, and they can work with them in that way. And I think that's a good way of working.
Yes, Jim.
Going back to what Diane was saying about the communication thing, I know that from a sports organisation point of view, association, we've had an enormous amount of help from Sen Scott, who, on the kind of signposting thing, our clubs probably don't even know that Sen Scott exists, but we get a lot of information every week from Diane, and we can send that then out to the clubs who, can make use of it or not. On the communication thing, and the kind of virtual community sports hub, I think that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to be that virtual community sports hub so that we can get all the information and the help out to the clubs. Because the clubs, we're volunteers, but that's the role that we've chosen. The clubs are groups of volunteers who are passionate about their particular club and their particular sport. And they will be spending all their spare time, which is very limited, trying to find facilities to do their training or play their matches, trying to find funding, all of those things that take up so much time and actually sap a lot of the energy from a club. And so if we can get support from other organisations that we can then pass on to the clubs so that they can use it, they just wouldn't know where to look in the first place. So we need these virtual hubs to be able to support the clubs and take, knowledge from Sen Scott, etc.
Just going back to the support for clubs question, actually, locally we have the professional part of that, which is our club development officers that are attached to each of our community clusters, and we hold community forums led by our club development officer in conjunction with Club Sport Stirling, our sports council. But in attendance are clubs from that community, sports providers, and usually the head of PE. And the agenda isn't fixed. There might be some core elements of the agenda, but the agenda is influenced by the clubs attending. And from those meetings, we've had follow-up meetings between clubs facilitated by one of our officers on what you mentioned on accessing funding, how you can develop coaches, and we found that model to be quite effective in terms of working, and it's done within the community and it's not done within the school. It can be, we've held it before in a local pub in Calendar, it can be at a club as well, but it could be at any other facility at all. We kind of see them as a virtual community sports hub, because what we really are looking for are the clubs to try and influence and access better use of facilities, upskill their workforce, maybe try and develop their club, making links with the professional staff to have school tasters that may link directly to the club with the club support, helping support the taster. But we see that community forum as being something that we wish to develop on and tie into with education now as well.
It's just coming back to that earlier question. I mean, that volunteer, that essential human resource, the volunteers, the number of those people who are coaches. An illness can collapse a club. Somebody walks away with collapse. And all of your organisations, there's some workforce planning involved there about whether there's a gap, whether somebody's retiring, there's a workforce planning takes place in all your organisations. And there'll be support for human resource management. Much easier when you're paying someone, not a volunteer that can decide when they're going to be there, when they're not going to be there. Harder to spot somebody under pressure, dealing with that issue. And we heard earlier from a session here that not much of that takes place, even among those better organised. You know, we had an admission this morning that we don't know exactly how many people are out there. We depend on the household survey to tell us how many people out there are out there. We can't identify the gaps. We don't know the pressures they're under. You know, do any of your organisations, with the clubs and the organisations you work with, you know, in the strategy in Stirling, it might be interesting. Do you engage them in workforce planning, and can you anticipate where you need to get new volunteers and how many they need to get in a you know, in a 5-year cycle to maintain the activity? And indeed, all of this enthusiasm after the games and everything else about increasing this demand, and we're hoping this demand comes up, and we don't know whether the volunteers or the coaches can meet that demand.
We are working with that. The key role, and I maybe have glossed over it, is of the club development officer who is seen at the clubs, is working with the club secretary and the president. We want these people to take, or our staff, to take away the unnecessary chores that a volunteer would maybe have to do. We want to utilise the volunteer and their expertise and enhance that. We don't want them to be bogged down in laborious administration. The club development officer is that animateur. They're in the local community. They are informed by their local clubs of what they require to be done, not us telling them what they should be doing. And it's pulling together the resource and information of a variety of different partners in local communities at a variety of different levels, whether it's a national agency, whether it's a regional central sporting partnership, or whether it's the local authority. The clubs can't be expected to stem the tide of information or those people contacting them. They need a conduit to help them navigate their way through that. And what we try and...
To Mr. Smith, who runs a club. There's 50 young people, you know, been involved in that. Mr. Smith decides with Mrs. Smith that he's going to give it up next month. What's in place to ensure the future of that activity? What thinking is taking place? Or Mr. Smith takes ill. Is there a coordinator that will step in there until they get other volunteers up his pace?
We've done that in the past.
What I'm saying is there any sort of planning and thinking that takes place there, or do we just react to the emergency?
Well, there is planning, but there's also got to be that adaptability and flexibility that you're not going to know when somebody's going to be sick. But if you've got good communication with the club, then you can get some contact there where you can try and support or help deliver or find a coach for them. But
he's going to get sick in your department, but you know that there are procedures that will kick in. There's a workforce plan.
Yep.
You know when Mr. Smith's going to retire from your department, so you will plan for that eventuality. But given everyone who's written to us and come along here and says, we can't run sport in Scotland without the volunteers, we have discovered this morning there isn't a workforce plan, and there's no human relations management that looks at that tremendous resource. If we were running this for profit, we wouldn't run it in the way we're running it now, would we? John?
Yeah, I mean...
And Mark, I think, watching?
Yeah, the volunteers that work with Sported, they work with Sported to then support the clubs. So that's the volunteer. We recruit a group of volunteers who've got business skills that then they can give to the clubs. And part of the skills that they give to the clubs is looking at what their succession planning is, looking at where their next group of volunteers are going to come from. But we're really clear whenever the volunteers start to work with Sported, we see them as part of our team, our Sported team, so that they are given training around what a role of a volunteer is. They're given skills around mentoring. And also we see them as having a career with us that lasts maybe 2 years, 3 years, and they work on a series of projects with us. So they will, during that 2 or 3 year period, we'll get feedback from them in terms of how their volunteer experience is going. We'll give them training. We'll get them together as a group and share best practice around some of that stuff. So I think there are ways in which you can work. I think the key thing is to see the volunteer as not just giving something to the club, but also being able to get something out of the relationship themselves, so that they're being developed as a person, their skills are getting developed. And I think that's a way of how you can build a really sustainable group of mentors and volunteers, whether it's with a group like Sported, who then pass on those skills to the sports clubs, or whether it's with the sports clubs themselves, because I think there definitely needs to be a plan around how do you train those volunteers, how do you keep them.
Mark?
Following on from the points that have been said so far, that there's a balance to be struck within many of the charities that we deal with, or voluntary organisations at large. There's a balance to be struck between actually just getting on and delivering, which most of these volunteers are interested in doing, and with the focus being on that and the limited amount of time that they have to do that, it's hard then to look at forward planning, it's hard then to look at evaluation, it's hard then to see just beyond sustaining your club for the next month or for the next 6 months. But one of the things that a number of the organisations, the trust funds, such as Active Communities in Paisley, Reach for the Sky Basketball, Spartans, and so many more that I couldn't name, they look to grow their own leaders, but that process takes time. It's about identifying the young person that's come through by doing their activity, and then they want to take on some more responsibility, be that in coaching, be that in advertising, be that and just organising some activities and providing opportunities for them to grow. And I think one of the things then that possibly we need to look at as a whole is what the structure is in place to allow those organisations to organically develop. And again, it goes back to that ownership, because if someone has grown through the organisation, for example, one of the JOG leaders from Active Communities that came along had never been physically active before in their lives, had a young son, or a newborn baby rather, and took part in the Mums on the Run programme, who then went on to train to become a JOG Scotland JOG leader, who then went on to deliver their own group, that then freed up the paid staff's time within Active Communities to focus on growing other leaders that can then be delivering activity in the community. And then they're looking at the broader picture. So it's a balance of time and providing the right support for the volunteer to be able to develop in their own time scale.
Okay, we're into the last sort of 10 minutes of this. Mark, do you want to come in? Is there any other member who hasn't spoken want to come in at this point? No, Mark?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point that you raise, convener, around, I think there are a range of sporting clubs out there in Scotland. There are clubs which have got a very strong infrastructure and are in the position where they could cope with an example such as that which you raise. But there are also, I think, clubs which are effectively 1 or 2 man bands or 1 or 2 women bands, where if there is an illness or a loss of motivation or a decision to step back for health reasons, things like that, then that does put the club's future in jeopardy. And I guess the question would be is whether you go in and try and perform some sort of life support to that club and try and keep that club going, or whether it's about ensuring that there is opportunity there for the young people who were at that club to then find new opportunities elsewhere. Because I think the sporting landscape is such that, and particularly at a community level, that clubs come and clubs go depending on, as you say, the availability of willing volunteers. And I don't think we should maybe focus too heavily on the notion that you have to keep the clubs that are there active for perpetuity. It's about ensuring that there is still that breadth of opportunity, because as clubs will fold, new clubs will start up in other places, and it's about just making sure that the opportunities are there for people. So I think that's maybe where the focus should be on, rather than saying that you must keep this club active. It's about ensuring that there is still provision.
At this point, I've got no other members coming in at this point, but I would like to offer the opportunity to the witnesses. We'll get 10 minutes. The witnesses, if they wish to take this opportunity just to put what they would have wanted to put on the record. I mean, we've had just approximately an hour, and I know that's never enough time. But you've came along today, and if there was something that you felt that was important that the committee, a priority area that you wish to speak to us and put on the record now, or indeed we would welcome further contributions and reflection of this session and earlier sessions and the evidence in general to communicate with us. about things that you would strongly disagree with or indeed strongly agree with to help us in our deliberations. So are there any of the witnesses at this point that would like... Carice?
I just wanted to come back on a point I think that sort of was reflected this morning about sort of difficulties of obtaining funding and public funding, which I do appreciate, and I think there is a place for sports projects to get public funding, but I would also say that there are lots of other sources of funding that are out there, and whilst I know it's difficult for small clubs to sort of evidence what they're doing, if they can put forward a good picture of what they're doing and what impact they're having, there are opportunities for funding. We've been very fortunate to have commercial funding from organisations, and not only is that funding brought us cash, but it's brought fantastic opportunities. For example, we had 40 volunteers had worked at the Olympics for 8 weeks this year through one of our sponsors, and we had 10 assisting the co-op with their Highland Games roadshow. So it's not just the cash that you get, it's also fantastic opportunities as well. So we've been very fortunate in being sponsored by the co-op and Coca-Cola. And just to say that they look beyond public funding sometimes.
You also raise an important issue I don't think we touched on about the transparency as well, about what the outcomes are in some of the clubs that are looking for funding, whether it can be a barrier but you know, an absolute necessity. John, do you want to place anything on the record? I don't know whether you want to come in there.
No, I think it's just the only thing that I would say is that we've been running our activity in Scotland since February, and really looking at the landscape in Scotland in terms of the people that are around the table today. We've been really impressed with the willingness of organisations to work together and to really try and find the best way of using sport to help young people in deprived communities. And I think some of the things that we've talked about around volunteers and some of the barriers, we've focused on that, but I think around the kind of the Sports for Development agenda, I think the kind of thing that we've found is the amazing potential there is in terms of the organisations that are really wanting to link up and wanting to join up so that they can work with the young people. And I think it's about being able to take that forward.
Jane, did you want to put anything on the record? Or? Don't feel compelled. I mean, it was just I've seen you indicating earlier, and if there isn't any further comment, Mark.
It's time, if that's all right. Just to make one final point.
Yes, certainly.
I think it follows up on the funding question there, and with funding being so tight for sports organisations, there is this issue about funding being outcomes-led, and sports organisations, in our experience that we support, find it very difficult to be able to evidence their outcomes and be able to robustly say that what they're doing is making the difference that they think it does. And it's even more important, and from a purely business context, for some of the social enterprises that we support, if you have a limited self-generated income and grants income, then you have to know that what you're doing with that is actually making the difference that you believe it is. And one of the things that, in terms of the Trust trying to support the capacity within the sector, is to, we've had a pilot programme of 8 social enterprises undergoing a 2-year period of evaluation training through Evaluation Support Scotland. And one of the things that is coming out of that is that organisations really want to be able to contribute to local and national outcomes, but actually learning about what those outcomes are and learning how to evidence them is critically important, both from their own perspective of their management of their cash and best use of that, and also being able to say to public funders, we can deliver this programme and we know that it will achieve this, and this is the evidence. So I just wanted to add that into the record as well.
Diane.
From my perspective, working with social enterprises, there's a huge appetite out there from sports clubs to become sustainable in the long term. There is a huge appetite for communities to help avoid closure of their sports facilities. They're desperately keen to keep them open. It's very challenging for these organisations to actually find financial support to do this. The Robertson Trust run a fantastic community sport funding stream. Sport Scotland obviously also have government and lottery money, but it's all around facility. We could really do with a way that we can support these community sports organisations, or just communities, to actually do some of the good work that they are desperately keen to do. We don't really have, you know, a place for them to go to try and access some money to allow them to do that extra bit, to become robust, to become sustainable, to then be able to make more impact on their community. They do it already just from their volunteering, but when they want to do more, it's difficult for them to find some way to at least kickstart them doing more. It seems to be, from my perspective, in the organisations I work with, and the phone rings every couple of days, that's a real gap. That's all. Thank you.
No, these are interesting points, sustainability. Can I thank you on behalf of the committee, not just for your attendance here today, but for the written submissions that have been provided. And I know the session today and those written submissions will inform us greatly in terms of our final report. But I would urge you to keep an eye on the progress. Feel free to communicate with us throughout that process. As I said earlier, if things that are important to you are not being appropriately recognised, feel free to get in touch. If there's things that you strongly agree with, get in touch, or strongly disagree with. But thank you very, very much for your attendance here today, your participation, and the information that's been provided. I'm sure it will be useful. We're going quickly now as a committee to our agenda item number 3, which we're going into private session for that. Yeah, we're going into private session. Thank you very much for your attendance. Yes, Nanette, I understand.